Even Xianxia's curiosity couldn't help but be aroused when he heard these words. Exactly what news would actually cause an imperial monarch and patriarch of a top-rate power in the imperial region like Shintu Qingyuan to describe it as world-shocking? The atmosphere in the hall was slightly deathly silent, and many were waiting for Shintu Qingyuan to reveal the answer. Shintu Qingyuan couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief when he succeeded in changing the topic and arousing everyone's curiosity. Actually, he'd been constantly hesitating on the matter of cooperating with the Divine Institute, and he wasn't willing to make a decision on it yet. You read it out. Shintu Qingyuan passed the jade slip to an attendant at the side. The attendant received the jade slip and scanned through it hastily, and when he saw the content of the jade slip, he couldn't help but reveal a stunned and astounded expression. This just happened to be noticed by the others in the hall, and they couldn't help but feel even more curious. 5 months ago, the descendant of the eternal Yi clan, Yifeng, who was ranked at the 92nd position on the Universe Enlightened chart, was killed at Violet Jade region. After a short while, the attendant took a deep breath and started reading out the information contained within the jade slip. According to reliable sources, Yifeng perished at the hands of Oracle Mountain's personal disciple, Xianxia. As soon as these words were spoken, many people here were slightly surprised, but most of them were puzzled. Such news was shocking indeed, but it was far from being world-shocking. Moreover, many great figures present here were already aware of this incident, so they felt that there wasn't anything special about it. Xianxia was a personal disciple of Oracle Mountain. So, was there anything worthy of being surprised by when he merely killed a descendant of the Yi clan? Amongst the people present here, only Shinta Yenran had a different reaction when she heard this news. A wisp of a strange expression couldn't help but suffuse the corners of her moist lips, and she glanced imperceptibly at Xianxia. Yet she noticed that the latter was completely indifferent, as if it wasn't related to him at all. Shinta Yenran couldn't help but be amused by this. If those old fellows in the hall know that Xianxia is sitting here right beneath their very noses, I wonder what they would think. However, Shinta Yenran was also slightly curious because it was merely a descendant of the Yi clan, Yifeng, who was killed. Even though the Yi clan was an eternal clan, it was quite inferior when compared to the Oracle Mountain. So, how could such news cause a stir in the entire imperial region? Everyone, calm yourselves. This news is only a catalyst, and the main point is coming. Shintu Qingyuan spoke and instructed the attendant to continue reading. Only now did all of them come to an understanding, and they remained silent and listened. Yifeng's death caused the entire Yi clan to be infuriated, and they dispatched a force led by Imperial Monarch Nandu to eliminate Xianxia. The attendant's voice reverberated through the spacious hall. Logically speaking, Xianxia was a disciple of the Oracle Mountain, and the Yi clan's actions of reacting so intensely merely for the sake of Yifeng was undoubtedly equivalent to entering into war with the Oracle Mountain. However, according to reliable sources, there was actually a secret behind all of this. When they heard this, the curiosity of everyone within the hall had been drawn out once more, and they revealed a wisp of surprise and bewilderment. Exactly what sort of secret would actually allow the Yi clan to dare dispatch an imperial monarch to eliminate a disciple of Oracle Mountain? In next to no time, the attendant exposed the answer. It turned out that all of this was related to a collaboration between the Yi clan, Xiaohao clan, and the Sovereign clan. The attendant immediately explained the matter of the marriage agreement between Xiaohao Yu and Huizong, and the process was complicated and full of ups and downs. The rough content of his explanation was that for the sake of forming a collaboration between them, the Yi clan, Xiaohao clan, and the Sovereign sect had jointly established a marriage agreement, but this marriage agreement had been destroyed. Not only that, Yi Yan, who was in charge of this matter, had betrayed the Sovereign sect after the marriage agreement was destroyed. On the other hand, the key figure that caused all of this was the personal disciple of Oracle Mountain, Xianxia. In other words, it was precisely because of Xianxia's appearance that not only was the marriage agreement destroyed, even a descendant of the Yi clan and elder of the Sovereign sect, Yi Yan, had betrayed her clan and sect. This caused the collaboration between the Yi clan, Xiaohao clan, and Sovereign sect to be spoiled. Because of this, the Yi clan was utterly infuriated, and it dispatched Imperial Monarch Nandu's group with the intention of taking revenge. When they heard all of this, all the people in the hall couldn't help but be moved. Some were shocked, some felt disbelief, some were surprised and bewildered, and so on and so forth. How could they have imagined that Yi Feng's death would actually be related to so many things? Moreover, it was even related to a collaboration between the Yi clan, the Xiaohao clan, and the sovereign sect. No wonder the Yi clan was so furious. So, it turns out that all of this was actually related to the interests of the three powers. That disciple of Oracle Mountain, Chun Shi, is simply a troublemaker. When he was at the desolate Manka ruins all those years ago, he'd utterly offended the Imperial region's Luo clan, Gongya clan, Di clan, and various other powers. Now, he spoiled the collaboration between the Yi clan, Xiaohao clan, and the sovereign sect. He really is audacious to the extreme. This news can really be considered as world-shocking. If it spread to the entire Imperial region, it would definitely cause an extraordinary stir. All the great figures in the hall discussed animatedly and sighed endlessly with emotion. All those years ago, because of the enmity that had been formed at the shore of the God-burial ocean, Chun Shi's name had spread throughout the world, and it was known to all. It was also from that moment onward that the entire ancient god domain knew that Oracle Mountain actually had a new personal disciple. As one of the top-rate powers in the Imperial region, the Shinto clan had naturally heard of this matter, and it was even to the extent that this matter was related to Shinto Yenran. So, they even had a deeper understanding of what had occurred at the shore or the God-burial ocean all those years ago. So, that was the reason why they seemed so shocked and sighed with emotion when they found out at Yi Feng's death, Yi Yan's betrayal, and the destruction of the collaboration between the Yi clan, Xiaohao clan, and the sovereign sect were all related to Chun Shi. At this moment, even Shinto Yenran's heart was unable to calm down for a long time. It was the first time she'd heard of this matter, and when she finished listening to it, she even felt that it was inconceivable. Was all of this really done by you? Shinto Yenran couldn't help but send Chun Shi a voice transmission. Yes. Chun Shi still seemed to be indifferent and composed, and he merely acknowledged it and didn't speak any further. After he found out that the world-shocking news Shinto Qingyuan obtained was matters related to himself, it immediately caused him to lose all interest. However, he couldn't help but sigh with emotion in his heart. There really isn't a wall in this world that doesn't have a crack. Information about all of this really spread quickly. After she obtained confirmation from Chun Shi, Shinto Yenran felt even stronger disbelief. She clearly remembered that when they parted at the God-burial ocean all those years ago, Chun Shi's cultivation was merely at the peak of the domain enlightened spirit god realm. But after just a few years of time, not only had his cultivations advanced successively into the advanced stage of the universe enlightened ancestral god realm, he'd even done so many things that could shake the heavens and the earth like this. This was extremely shocking to her. If it wasn't because the environment was unsuitable for it, Shinto Yenran would have almost been unable to restrain herself from asking Chun Shi actually how he accomplished all of this. The discussion in the hall didn't continue for long before their attention was drawn over once more by the next piece of information that the attendant read out. It wasn't just the Yi clan that took action to pursue Chun Shi, and the Xiaohao clan and the sovereign sect had reacted as well. But according to information we obtained, Imperial Nandu's group was completely annihilated, and they were all slaughtered by the disciple of Oracle Mountain, Chun Shi. As soon as these words were spoken, the atmosphere in the hall immediately became perfectly silent. The pupils of everyone constricted while they revealed a wisp of disbelief. That Chun Shi actually killed an imperial monarch? How could that be possible? They clearly remembered that when Chun Shi first entered into their vision a few years ago, he was merely a domain-enlightened spirit god. But only a few years had passed now, so no matter how fast his cultivation advanced, he would at most be able to possess the strength of a universe-enlightened ancestral god. So, how could he possibly be able to surmount a realm and annihilate an imperial monarch? In the entire ancient god domain, such an astounding incident had never occurred since the ancient times until now. How could that be possible? What nonsense! This information is definitely fake. Many great figures denounced this information for being exaggerative. Just as the information provided, Imperial Monarch Nandu was really killed by Chun Shi. This matter has even been confirmed by the Yi clan themselves. At this moment, Xianxia spoke, and just a short few words immediately caused the noise in the hall to vanish before it returned once more to a deathly silent state. It's actually true? All of their faces froze slightly, and tempestuous waves couldn't help but arise in their hearts. They were still unable to imagine exactly how that Xianxia accomplished this. Xianxia glanced at Xianxia instead while her heart couldn't help but thump. She bit her cherry lips, and she forcefully restrained her curiosity and didn't ask about it in the end. But it's impossible to confirm whether someone had lent a hand during the battle between Xianxia and Imperial Monarch Nandu. According to my own deduction, no matter how heaven-defying his combat strength is, it's probably impossible for Xianxia to have accomplished this on his own. What Xianxia said next caused many people in the hall to heave a sigh of relief for no rhyme or reason. When he heard this, Xianxia, who was originally indifferent, couldn't help but feel slight admiration towards Xianxia's ability of deduction. During his battle with Imperial Monarch Nandu on that day, he would indeed be unable to accomplish it without Little Bao's help. Actually, all of this isn't important. Xianxia suddenly changed the topic and said, "I'll tell all of you the next portion of the news." All of them were instantly stunned. Could it be that there's even more astounding news to be announced? All of you're already aware that it wasn't just the Yi clan that dispatched forces this time. The Xiaohao clan dispatched a group led by Imperial Monarch Taijing, and the sovereign sect dispatched the 5 divine spirit generals. Xianxia spoke calmly. However, just half a month ago, no matter if it was Imperial Monarch Taijing's group or the 5 divine spirit generals, all of them perished at Spectre Galaxy. Supposedly, the one that killed them was a great figure that had vanished without a trace 8,000 years ago. The group from the Xiaohao clan had perished. The 5 divine spirit generals from the sovereign sect had fallen. When they found out about this, the hall exploded into an uproar, and their hearts shook without end. Most of these were imperial monarchs that had stood towering in the world for countless years, yet they'd actually perished simultaneously now. Who was that great figure? Someone couldn't help but ask this question. Imperial Monarch Ziwei, Dong Bowen. Xianxia lightly spat out a few words and spoke in a loud and clear voice. Imperial Monarch Ziwei, Dong Bowen, a peerless and legendary imperial monarch. His status in the ancient god domain was so high that it was sufficient for him to be ranked amongst Imperial Monarch Xinwu and Imperial Monarch Gochun. In the cultivation world, there were numerous legends about Dong Bowen. For example, it was said that he was a spirit that was born from within the chaotic violet mist, and he possessed peerlessly extraordinary natural talent. There were also rumors that said Dong Bowen had the greatest chance of advancing into the Downlord realm from amongst all the 9th-star imperial monarchs in the world. However, no matter what the rumors said, Dong Bowen's strength was undoubtedly formidable, and no one dared to question this. However, when they found out that Dong Bowen, who'd always been elusive like a floating cloud, had suddenly struck so ruthlessly, and he'd annihilated Imperial Monarch Tiajing's group and the 5 divine spirit generals, all the great figures of the Xinta clan that were present here had finally been completely shocked and revealed expressions of surprise. No matter if it was Imperial Monarch Taijing or the 5 divine spirit generals, all of them weren't ordinary figures, yet Dong Bowen had actually killed them. So, wasn't this equivalent to completely offending the Xiaohao clan and sovereign sect? Indeed, Dong Bowen was ranked at the peak of the Imperial Monarch realm, and he could look down upon most people in the world. But one shouldn't forget that the Xiaohao clan was an eternal clan, and there was at least one senior at the Downlord realm within the clan. As for the sovereign sect, it was even more terrifying because it was one of the 5 extremes of the imperial region. Moreover, it handled matters in a merciless and cruel manner. Even if Dong Bowen was such a formidable existence, he still had to weigh the consequences of offending such a great power, right? But it just so happened that Dong Bowen had acted in this way. Why did he do all of this? For a time, the hall was deathly silent, and everyone was shocked by this piece of news. Have all of you heard the story that Dong Bowen wanted to join Oracle Mountain many years ago in order to search for a method to advance into the Imperial Monarch realm? Even though he was refused by Oracle Mountain, he'd incidentally obtained the guidance of the Grand Lord, Wuxia. Amidst this deathly silent atmosphere, Xianxia spoke slowly, and he spoke about a secret from extremely long ago. It was precisely because of this guidance that Dong Bowen was able to advance smoothly into the imperial monarch realm. Everyone was stunned while many quickly guessed something, causing their eyes to focus while they revealed expressions of understanding. So, in this way, Imperial Monarch Ziwei actually made a move this time for the sake of protecting Qianxi? It's definitely because of that. Regardless of whether it was Imperial Monarch Taijing's group or the 5 Divine Spirit Generals, all of them were pursuing the heir of Oracle Mountain, Qianxi, with the intent to kill. Now that all of them had perished at Imperial Monarch Ziwei's hands, and coupled with this relationship between Imperial Monarch Ziwei and the Grand Lord of Oracle Mountain, it clearly displays that Imperial Monarch Ziwei did this in order to protect Qianxi. No wonder Imperial Monarch Ziwei dared to act in that way. So, it turns out that it was for the sake of repaying the Grand Lord's kindness of providing guidance to him. All of them discussed while exclaiming with admiration. Only Qianxi himself was clearly aware of exactly why Dong Bowen had done all of that, and it was absolutely not simply for the sake of repaying his eldest senior brother's kindness. If analyzed in this way, then when this piece of news spreads throughout the imperial region, it would really be sufficient to cause a mighty uproar. Bao sighed with emotion. He'd met Qianxi in the past and knew exactly how extraordinary that young man's natural talent was. However, he'd never imagined that after parting for just a few years, that young man would actually accomplish such world-shocking deeds. As soon as these words were spoken, it obtained the acknowledgement of many. However, Xianxia shook his head and said, "If it was merely like that, then it wouldn't be worthy of paying much attention to. Unfortunately, the matters of the world are never so simple." All of them were instantly astounded. What does he mean by that? Could it be that there's even more explosive news that's yet to be revealed? It wasn't just them. Even Qianxi couldn't help but be stunned, and he slightly wondered exactly what Xianxia intended to say. In next to no time, Xianxia revealed the answer. Just 3 days ago, news came from Mahler region that the sovereign sect's divine sovereign priest Mo was completely annihilated by the Oracle Mountain's Grand Lord. Bang! It was like all of them were struck by lightning, and they were stunned on the spot while an unprecedentedly strong impact struck their heart. The divine sovereign priest Mo, that was an existence at the Tao Lord realm. He was practically eternal, indestructible, and possessed supremely extraordinary ability. Yet now, a great figure like this had actually perished. This was simply astounding and unimaginable. After all, throughout the entire ancient god domain, merely a small portion of existences were capable of attaining the Tao Lord realm, and it might even be possible to count them with one's fingers. They could be said to be existences at the top of the pyramid in the ancient god domain, and they could be described as being rare like phoenix feathers and Qilin horns. In the memories of everyone, it had been too long since news of a Tao Lord's death had surfaced, and the last Tao Lord that had perished before this was a matter of a few tens of millions of years ago. That Tao Lord was a Tao Lord of the Rock clan, and it was the Rock Tao Lord. However, he'd perished from suffering tribulation and the wrath of the heavens, and it was completely different from the death of the divine sovereign priest, Mo, who'd been annihilated by the Grand Lord of Oracle Mountain. Thus, the shock these two incidents created couldn't be compared. At this moment, even Qianxi couldn't help but exclaim with admiration in his heart. Unlike everyone else, his current mental state was one that was relaxed and delighted. At that time before he left Aramba Temple, he'd known that his eldest senior brother was in battle with the divine sovereign priest Mo, and this battle might even continue for a few years. However, even Qianxi had never expected that his eldest senior brother would have attained victory when he'd just arrived at the imperial region. How many years has it been? Another Tao Lord has actually fallen. What does the Oracle Mountain intend to do? Could it be that it really intends to wage war against the sovereign sect? I never expected that after he remained in seclusion from the world for so long, the Grand Lord's cultivation would become even more terrifying. Even Tao Lord Mo had perished at his hands. Such ability is simply inconceivable. Now, the calm situation in the Imperial region is definitely going to be overturned. The death of a Tao Lord, I wonder what sort of disaster the shock created by such an incident would cause. Oracle Mountain. Oracle Mountain again. No matter if it's the Grand Lord Wu Xuechan or Chan Shi, could they have talked it over and agreed to carry out such deeds? That might really be possible. After all, as far as I'm concerned, the Oracle Mountain would definitely not watch indifferently as the Yi clan, Xiaohao clan, and Sovereign Sect collaborated with each other, and the Grand Lord's actions of killing Dao Lord Mo Lin is definitely a form of counterattack towards their collaboration. The deathly silent atmosphere in the surroundings was quickly destroyed, and the sounds of discussions rumbled. All of them were analyzing the effect of Divine Sovereign Priest Mo Lin's death towards the Imperial region. Chun Shi didn't know whether to laugh or cry when he heard these discussions. He was very clearly aware that his eldest senior brother had utterly not killed Dao Lord Mo Lin for the sake of launching a counterattack against the Sovereign Sect. On the other hand, it was because his eldest senior brother had killed 3 red-robed Grand Priests while heading to the God Burial Ocean to welcome him back to the clan, and this incident had infuriated the Divine Sovereign Priest Mo Lin, causing Mo Lin to pursue them. If it wasn't for that, Chun Shi would have returned to Oracle Mountain with his eldest senior brother a long time ago, and he would have had to take a detour to Aramba Temple. However, he was unable to explain this, and he could only silently approve of thoughts and guesses of everyone in the hall. I never imagined that your eldest senior brother would actually be so formidable. Shintu Yenran sighed with emotion as well, and she sent a voice transmission to Chun Shi. Of course, you're not bad yourself. You're merely at the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm, yet you were able to surmount a realm and annihilate Imperial Monarch Nandu. How extraordinary would you be once you attain the Dao Lord realm? I'm not as formidable as you think. It was mostly luck and coincidence that allowed me to kill Imperial Monarch Nandu on that day. Chun Shi laughed bitterly. Hypocrite! Shintu Yenran glared at him while extraordinary splendor arose from her starry eyes, and she seemed to be thinking of something. Let's not mention the effect of this incident towards the entire Imperial region for now. Everyone is already clearly aware now that the Sovereign Sect intended to collaborate with the Yi clan and Xiaohao clan and stand on the same side. However, they suffered a strong counterattack from the Oracle Mountain. Under such circumstances, do all of you think that something similar might occur if our Shinto clan decides to collaborate with the Divine Institute? Suddenly, Shintu Qingyuan spoke. His words suppressed all the clamorous noise in the surroundings and caused the hearts of everyone to tremble. Moreover, the atmosphere turned deathly silent once more. Don't forget that Oracle Mountain has a strained relationship with the Divine Institute as well, Shintu Qingyuan added. When these words were combined with the information they obtained earlier, it caused the expressions of many within the hall to change slightly. Fourth brother, you're exaggerating a little just to scare everyone. Presently, the death of Dao Lord Mo Lin is equivalent to the Oracle Mountain having shed all pretenses with the Sovereign Sect. Under such circumstances, would the Oracle Mountain still dare to make another formidable enemy? Shintu Mingda laughed lightheartedly and seemed indifferent towards all of this. Big brother, it's always wise to play safe. I feel that our Shinto clan should maintain neutrality under such circumstances, and it's best to adopt a wait-and-see attitude. Shinto Bao spoke in a low voice. Third brother, even you've realized that with the death of Dao Lord Mo Lin, the situation in the entire Imperial region would definitely undergo a great change. Under such circumstances, if we still refuse to make a choice, then it would be too late for us to regret it. Shintu Mingda frowned and spoke with displeasure. When the two of them were about to enter into an argument once more, a voice suddenly entered from outside the hall. Patriarch, the emissary of the Divine Institute will be here in a moment. Just these few words caused the argument in the hall to instantly vanish, and it became deathly silent. But right after that, Shintu Mingda grunted coldly and spoke in a slightly threatening tone. Third brother, you better not speak improperly later. Otherwise, if you offend the emissary of the Divine Institute, then it would affect our Shinto clan badly. Humph! Shinto Bao grunted coldly and didn't speak any further. That's enough. It wouldn't be too late to decide after we discuss it in detail with the emissary of the Divine Institute. Shintu Qingyuan waved his hand. As he spoke, he looked at Shinto Yenran and said, Yenran, no matter what your thoughts are, You act courteously later. Shintu Yenran bit her cherry lips, but he still nodded in the end. When Xianxia witnessed this, he merely glanced at Shintu Yenran and didn't say anything. Power Seal disciple of the Divine Institute, Gong Sun Mu, and descendant of the Green Roar Dragon clan, Taba Chuan, have come to pay a visit to the seniors of the Shintu clan. After a short moment, a low and indifferent voice suddenly resounded from outside the hall. Accompanying this voice was a man that walked into the hall while surrounded by a group of people, just like a bright moon that was surrounded by a host of stars. There were both men and women in the group, and all of them surged with spirit while divine radiance flowed throughout their bodies. Every single one of them possessed formidable cultivations, and they were outstanding amongst their peers. However, the most dazzling was undoubtedly that man. He wore black clothes that were cut to fit his figure, and he had white skin that was fair like jade and emanated a crystalline and translucent glow. Moreover, his entire body emanated rays of divinity, causing him to seem extraordinary and otherworldly. He had violet-colored long hair that fluttered behind his back, and it revealed an angular face that was peerlessly handsome. He was extremely extraordinary. His bearing was calm and composed while every single move he made was like that of royalty, and his calm aura carried a feeling of supremacy and haughtiness. When looked at from afar, he was simply like he was born a god, and he revealed peerless elegance that was simply indescribable. Aloof and extraordinary, as expected of a Power Seal disciple from the Divine Institute. He's like a king amongst universe-enlightened ancestral god, and he can look down upon most of his peers. Someone praised. Such an imposing aura was too rare. It was like a king had arrived to patrol the world on behalf of the Heaven Tao. Such a figure was bound to possess a limitless future, and if nothing unexpected happened, he would definitely step foot into the ranks of imperial monarchs. Everyone within the hall deeply agreed, and they were extremely shocked. He's Gong Sun Mu? Xianxia asked via voice transmission while seeming to be lost in thought. He discerned with a single glance that this man's cultivation had already attained perfection in the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm, and he'd completely released his potential as a king-rank universe-enlightened ancestral god. In other words, when this man advanced into the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm, he'd definitely refined and absorbed an 8th-grade king-rank ancestral Tao root. Merely this potential he possessed was already something that most universe-enlightened ancestral gods couldn't compare to. Yet now, this had already stepped foot into the peak of the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm, and he'd unearthed his potential as a king-rank universe-enlightened ancestral god. So, the might he possessed had become even more unfathomable. Yes, the Divine Institute has 18 Power Seal disciples, and Gong Sun Mu is ranked at the 3rd position. His strength is undoubtedly formidable. According to rumor, he's ranked at the 24th position on the Universe Enlightened chart, and such accomplishments can be said to be extraordinary. Shintu Yenran swiftly replied via voice transmission. Her voice carried a complicated tone. Even she had no choice but to admit that Gong Sun Mu was extremely formidable, and he wasn't just formidable in a regular way. Because even some old geezers at the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm could only dim in comparison before him. The 24th position? He's not bad indeed. Even though Xianxia spoke like this, his gaze had shot towards the man that followed by Gong Sun Mu's side. Is that fellow the descendant of the Green Roar Dragon clan? Taba Chuan? That person wore gray clothes, had a simple appearance, and an indifferent bearing. He was like a rock on a precipice, and he emanated a steady, imposing aura that gave others the feeling that he would remain immovable even if storms struck from all directions. Compared to Gong Sun Mu, his imposing aura was much more inferior, but he was clearly a top figure in the peak of the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm as well. Yes, Shintu Yenran nodded. She was just about to say something when Gong Sun Mu suddenly shot his gaze over and said with a smile, "I presume that you're Miss Yenran? You really do possess peerless beauty and charm." His voice was low and seemed to possess a form of magnetism. It was neither too fast or too slow, and it resounded like a bell can emanated a force that struck directly at the heart. As expected of the 3rd Power Seal disciple from the Divine Institute. Every single movement he makes carries the divine Tao within it, and even his voice is like the tune of the Tao and nature. Extraordinary splendor arose in the eyes of some women. Taoist brother, you're too kind. Xintu Yanran puckered her lips and smiled in a graceful and elegant manner, and then she said in a neither haughty nor humble manner, "Please have a seat." Gong Sun Mu smiled, and then he led the group behind him to take their seats in the hall. After he entered the Xintu clan's hall, he'd remained composed from the beginning until the end, and it was like he was taking a stroll in his own backyard. Moreover, his peerless and mighty bearing drew the attention of the entire hall, and it caused them think highly of him. Even if it was after he'd taken his seat now, he still seemed to be outstanding. On the other hand, the others by his side were extremely extraordinary as well. They stood side by side in a graceful manner, and all of them were suffused by divine radiance, causing them to serve as contrast for each other and seem even more dazzling and outstanding. These were the disciples of the Divine Institute. As disciples of one of the 5 extremes of the imperial region, all of them had a unique form of pride and dignity. Compared to them, the universe-enlightened ancestral gods from the Xintu clan that resided within the hall seemed inferior by comparison. She couldn't help but think because of this. As one of the top-rate powers of the imperial region, the Xintu clan's resources and reserves are extremely deep, but when their disciples at the universe-enlightened ancestral god are compared, then they really are just barely passable. As soon as he took his seat, Gong Sun Mu spoke frankly. "I presume seniors are already clearly aware of the reason I came today. I wonder if seniors have made a decision." As soon as these words were spoken, the atmosphere in the hall went silent, and everyone shot their gazes towards Xintu Qingyuan, who sat at the central seat of the host. "This matter has significant implications, so it's truly difficult for me to decide." Xintu Qingyuan suddenly sighed and seemed as if it was a difficult choice for him, yet he didn't answer the question directly at all. Gong Sun Mu merely grinned when facing this, and he said, "Looks like Senior is still worried about my Divine Institute's sincerity. To tell you the truth, since I've represented the Divine Institute to come here this time, I'm naturally able to make some promises. So long as the conditions Senior raises don't go too far, then I can represent the Divine Institute to immediately agree to them." These words were filled with confidence and boldness, and it caused the eyes of many within the hall to light up. "Ha ha ha! Since the Divine Institute has already shown such sincerity, we'll naturally not disappoint the Divine Institute." Before Xintu Qingyuan could speak, Xintu Mingda had already roared with laughter. "Big brother, don't speak so arbitrarily." Xintu Bao frowned, and he slightly detested Xintu Mingda's impatient attitude. "Third brother." Xintu Mingda's face sank, and he glared at Xintu Bao in a cautioning manner. "That's enough. We can slowly discuss this matter. There's no need to argue about it, so as to avoid incurring the ridicule of our guests." Xintu Qingyuan waved his hand as he spoke. "Ha ha! Looks like seniors haven't arrived at a uniform opinion. But I'm not in a hurry." Gong Sun Mu smiled indifferently, and then he changed the topic and said, "As one of the terms my Divine Institute provides, I can promise right now that so long as Miss Yanran joins the Divine Institute, then she'll be able to immediately become a Power Seal disciple." As soon as these words were spoken, everyone within the hall was shocked. A Power Seal disciple. That was the core force of the Divine Institute, and they possessed unimaginable authority and status. Up until now, the Divine Institute merely possessed 18 Power Seal disciples, and every single one of them were extraordinary geniuses that received extremely high regard from the important figures of the Divine Institute. Even if it was in the entire ancient god domain, as a Power Seal disciple of the Divine Institute, one would be revered no matter one went, and no one would dare disrespect a Power Seal disciple. Yet now, with just a few words, Gong Sun Mu had promised to give Xintu Yanran a position amongst the Power Seal disciple, and such extravagance was extremely shocking. What did this mean? It meant that so long as Xintu Yanran agreed, she would immediately advance leaps and bounds in status to become the 19th Power Seal disciple of the Divine Institute, and she would possess unimaginable authority and status. For a time, the gazes of many in the hall had shot towards Xintu Yanran, and their eyes carried envy that was impossible to conceal. Even the imperial monarchs of the Shinta clan sighed endlessly with emotion, and they clearly felt the Divine Institute's sincerity. Even Shunta Qingyuan seemed to be slightly surprised, as he'd never expected that the Divine Institute would reveal such great sincerity. For a time, he couldn't help but be slightly moved. Ha ha ha! Yanran, why don't you quickly thank young Master Gongsun for his kindness? This is an opportunity that's extremely difficult to come by, and others would even be able to get it even if they gave up their lives for it. Shinta Mingda roared once more with laughter, and his voice was filled with encouragement. Exactly. Yanran, if you become a powerful disciple of the Divine Institute, then our Shinta clan would be honored by this as well, and we would feel proud for you. This is an extremely rare honor. Then young man by Shinta Mingda's side spoke. He had a thin face, eyes that were like the eyes of a hawk, and he was 70% similar in appearance to Shinta Mingda. He was exactly Shinta Mingda's son. Shinta Xing. Something worthy of mention was that it was precisely Shinta Xing that led Gongsun Mu's group into the hall. I'm sorry. This matter is too significant while I'm inferior in both talent and knowledge, so I'm unable to bear such an honor. Please do forgive me, Taoist brother Gongsun. Unexpectedly, Shinta Yanran's expression was calm when facing such a rare opportunity, and she refused in a calm and composed manner. Based on her expression, she actually seemed to be not interested in this at all. This caused everyone to be slightly astounded, and they almost didn't dare believe their ears. This is an opportunity to become a Power Seal disciple of the Divine Institute, yet she actually refused it in such a casual manner? It wasn't just them. Even Gongsun Mu was slightly stunned while his brows knit together imperceptibly before he quickly recovered his calm. Amongst the people present, perhaps only Chun, she was clearly aware that Shinta Yanran had made her decision a very long time ago. So, not to mention being provided with a position amongst the Power Seal disciples, she would probably not agree even if the conditions were even more tempting. Yanran, such an honor is extremely heavy indeed, and it's normal for you to feel pressured. But refusing in such a way is slightly outrageous. Shinta Mingda spoke in a low voice, and it faintly seemed like he was berating her. Yanran, this opportunity is something young Master Gongsun strived to obtain with great difficulty. Acting in this way is extremely unbearable for everyone. Shinta Xing spoke with displeasure. Some of the other clansmen of the Shinta clan felt that Shinta Yanran was being unreasonable as well, because she just happened to not cherish such a huge opportunity and directly refused it. So, wasn't she being unreasonable by acting in this way? Miss Yanran's worried are normal. After all, becoming a Power Seal disciple of the Divine Institute doesn't just represent honor, and one has to shoulder responsibility as well. However, this isn't difficult. So long as you agree, Yanran, we can share responsibility for the pressure you experience. Gongsun Mu's voice was low and filled with magnetism, and it was still neither fast nor slow. He seemed to have not been infuriated by Shinta Yanran's refusal, and his composed bearing caused many of the others in the hall to be filled with admiration. This caused all the others in the hall to have a deeper feeling of how sincere the Divine Institute was, and they truly wished for nothing more than to help Shinta Yanran agree immediately. Shinta Yanran frowned instead, and she said frankly, "Thank you for your good intentions, Taoist brother. I've already decided, so please don't try to persuade me." When they heard this, both Shinta Mingda and Shinta Xing's faces sank, and they were extremely displeased by Shinta Yanran's stubbornness. It wasn't just them. Many great figures of the Shinta clan frowned as well. Slap! A disciple of the Divine Institute seemed to be unable to restrain himself any longer, and he suddenly smashed the table before him into pieces and said coldly, "You don't know what's good for you. Are you looking down on my Divine Institute?" The table shattered into powder that dispersed into the surroundings. The atmosphere in the hall instantly fell deathly silent, and only the furious and cold voice of that disciple from the Divine Institute still reverberated. Many clansmen of the Shinta clan frowned yet didn't say anything. Chun, she couldn't help but be slightly surprised when he saw this. This was the clan hall of the Shinta clan, yet this disciple of the Divine Institute dared to act so presumptuously. This clearly showed how arrogantly he was accustomed to acting. But it was very obvious that out of consideration for this disciple's identity, the members of the Xianxia clan had chosen to exercise forbearance when faced with such an action that had clearly gone too far. This caused Xianxia to have no choice but to sigh with emotion. Reputation really is everything. Merely the name of the Divine Institute seems to possess extraordinary deterring force. However, when he heard that person actually say that Xianxia didn't know what was good for her, it still caused Xianxia to frown while his eyes turned piercingly cold. The Xianxia clan was afraid of the Divine Institute, but he, Xianxia, wasn't. Taoist brothers of the Divine Institute, please calm your anger. Yanran has always had a frank disposition. Allow me to persuade her. Xianxia hurriedly tried to mediate when he noticed that the atmosphere was slightly off. As he spoke, his gaze descended onto Yanran, and he seemed to be exasperated by her actions as he said, Yanran, stop causing trouble. Quickly apologize to the Taoist brother of the Divine Institute so as to avoid making it difficult for everyone. Xianxia almost thought that he'd heard wrongly. How could someone help outsiders to bully their own clansmen? This fellow is truly a bastard. She couldn't help but glance at Xianxia who sat at the seat of the host. Yet he saw the latter reveal an emotionless expression, and it was utterly unable to discern any emotion from him. She couldn't help but be slightly disappointed by this. Yanran is your daughter, but you're actually watching indifferently under such circumstances. Isn't that a little too unreasonable? Haha, how truly laughable. You intend to force me to apologize just because I'm unwilling to join the Divine Institute? How could such an absurd and shameless thing occur in this world? At this moment, Yanran was infuriated as well. Her clear eyes were icy cold as she said coldly, I'll repeat it once more time. I, Yanran, don't care about becoming a Power Seal disciple. She spoke word by word in a forceful and resolute manner, and it caused those clansmen of the Xianxia clan to squint while they felt slight disbelief. How audacious! Looks like the Xianxia clan doesn't intend to collaborate with our Divine Institute. What a terrible attitude. Senior brother Gongsun, it looks like we've come here for nothing. The faces of those disciples from the Divine Institute sank while they sneered, and they were extremely displeased of Yanran. Yanran. Mingda's heart instantly jerked when he heard this, and he was slightly anxious. He immediately berated in a stern voice and said, Could it be that you really intend to disregard the interests of the Xianxia clan and bitterly disappoint all your clansmen? His voice carried a wisp of anger that wasn't concealed at all. Yanran puckered her cherry lips yet hesitated to speak. Obviously, she was enduring a form of indescribable pressure as well. Since Yanran is unwilling, then it's best to not force her. Whether she joins the Divine Institute or not isn't of much effect to the overall collaboration between the Xianxia clan and the Divine Institute. She couldn't help but sigh in his heart when he heard this, and he spoke out in the end. As soon as these words were spoken, it wasn't just the clansmen of the Xianxia clan who were stunned. Even the disciples of the Divine Institute couldn't help but be surprised. Who's this fellow? What right does he have to speak at this moment? Fellow Taoist, you seem extremely unfamiliar. Forgive me not remembering if I have seen you before, but may I know who you are? Gongsun Mu glanced at Xianxia and spoke indifferently. He's my friend. Before Yanran could finish speaking, she was interrupted by Xianxia. Is there any place for an outsider to interrupt at such a time? You're simply running wild. As he spoke, he glanced at Xianxia and spoke in a threatening manner. Friend, please show some self-respect. This is an internal matter of my Xianxia clan, and it isn't something that just anyone can interrupt. As soon as he finished speaking, a disciple of the Divine Institute couldn't help but laugh with ridicule. Haha, I thought he was someone great, yet he turns out to be a nobody that likes to poke his nose in other people's business. If this matter wasn't related to Yanran, I truly couldn't be bothered to pay attention to all of you. She merely smiled with narrowed eyes when facing this disdain and reproach, and he said casually, But since Yanran takes me to be her friend, then I'll naturally not stand by idly and watch all of this occur. These words were spoken in a casual manner, yet they seemed to be arrogant and jarring to the ear when it entered the ears of everyone within the hall. No matter if it was the clansmen of the Shinta clan or the disciples of the Divine Institute, all of them couldn't help but feel slight disbelief. Never had they imagined that this fellow with an ordinary appearance and bearing would actually dare to pick a fight with them at this moment. Has this fellow gone mad? Does he not know that this is the clan hall of the Shinta clan? Is he not aware that he's facing disciples of the Divine Institute? Yan Ren, where did you make such a friend? He's simply a reckless idiot. Someone couldn't help but ridicule, and it caused the others to roar with laughter. One of the disciples from the Divine Institute roared with laughter as he spoke as well, and he laughed endlessly with ridicule and seemed to have taken Xianxia to be a rash and brainless fellow. Shinta Yanran couldn't help but become indignant when she heard all of these insults towards Xianxia, and she was just about to say something when she was stopped by Xianxia. There's no need to make a fuss about it with them. That's really just a waste of time. As soon as he spoke these words, the expressions of those disciples from the Divine Institute turned cold. That disciple of the Divine Institute that ridiculed Xianxia earlier had suddenly stood up, and he stared at Xianxia with an overbearing gaze. Haha! Looks like this friend discontent towards my Divine Institute. He had a fair appearance, and he wore a silver robe that had broad sleeves and was secured by a belt, causing him to seem noble and dignified. However, his words were extremely oppressive, and they felt very offensive. It can't be said to be discontent at all. I just can't bear the sight of this. She spoke casually with an indifferent expression. At this moment, even many clansmen of the Shinta clan were slightly shocked by Xia's actions. Where exactly did this young man get the confidence to actually dare to enter into confrontation with disciples of the Divine Institute? Haha! How bold! Since it's like that, then do you dare to spar with me? That silver-robed man from the Divine Institute started laughing from extreme rage, and his entire body emanated a terrifying, imposing aura. The atmosphere instantly became murderous and tense. Taoist brother, calm your rage. Taoist brother, calm your rage. Leave this person to me. When he noticed that a battle was about to erupt, Shinta Xing hurriedly moved forward to persuade the disciple from the Divine Institute. Moreover, as he spoke, his face had turned gloomy, and he stared at Xianxia with an icy-cold gaze while he berated. Friend, please leave right now. Otherwise, don't blame me for driving you out. How dare you? Shinta Yanran struck the table before her as she stood up. Yanran, if you continue causing trouble, then you'll be punished according to the rules of the clan. Shinta Xing gritted his teeth with anger. All right, everyone, please hear me out. Suddenly, Gong Sun Mu, who was watching coldly from the sidelines, had spoken, and it instantly suppressed all the voices in the surroundings and drew the gazes of everyone in the hall to him. On the other hand, his gaze shot towards Xianxia from afar while his voice was low and indifferent. Friend, you said that you can't bear the sight of my Divine Institute? Merely these words alone caused the atmosphere in the hall to change abruptly. The air seemed as if it had frozen, and it was oppressive to the point of being suffocating. Xianxia seemed to have not noticed it at all, and he said casually, Did you not hear me clearly just now? Do I have to repeat it for a second time? At this moment, even the expressions of Shinta Mingda and Shinta Xing couldn't help but change, and they faintly felt that there was something wrong with Xianxia's reaction, but they were unable to pinpoint what was wrong about it. On the other hand, the patriarch of the Shinta clan, Shinta Qingyuan, still hadn't spoken. His eyes were slightly narrowed while his right index finger occasionally struck the back of his chair. No one knew exactly what he was thinking. When he heard Xianxia's answer, Gong Sun Mu suddenly started laughing, yet his laughter didn't contain any emotion. There has to be a reason, right? Or perhaps you're trying to defend Miss Yanran. What you said isn't wrong. Yanran is my friend, so it's naturally impossible for me to watch indifferently when it's related to her, said Xianxia in an indifferent tone. Since it's like that, then tell me what qualifications you possess to act in this way. Could it be that you think that the identity of Power Seal disciple of my Divine Institute isn't good enough for Miss Yanran? Gong Sun Mu's voice suddenly turned gloomy, and it carried a murderous tone. Force others to do that which they're unwilling isn't good in the end. Chun Shi's answer was very flat. I can't bother about the matters of others, but as her friend, I must bother about matters related to her. Can you even do it? That silver-robed man from the Divine Institute couldn't help but sneer. Chun Shi directly disregarded him and couldn't be bothered to argue with him. When he saw this, Gong Sun Mu went silent for a moment before he suddenly said, "This matter is related to the honor of my Divine Institute, so this matter has to be resolved." As soon as these words were spoken, it caused the hearts of the clansmen of the Shinta clan within the hall to tremble. At this point in the incident, they were very clearly aware that even if they interfere, it would be utterly impossible to change anything. However, they were still curious. Where exactly did this friend of Yenron's gain the confidence to act in this way? Does he not know what offending the Divine Institute represents? You intend to fight it out? Chun Shi's brows raised. What do you think? Gong Sun Mu answered with a question. Looks like I have no choice but to agree. Chun Shi spoke indifferently. Shinta Yenran originally intended to say something, but she was stopped by him. Because those fellows of the Divine Institute had successively ridiculed him just now, and it had caused him to be slightly infuriated. Even the nicest person experienced a moment where that person lost his temper. Chan Shi wasn't an emotionless person, so he was naturally unable to tolerate the insults directed at him by those fellows from the Divine Institute. If it was at any other time, he wouldn't even bother to make a fuss about it with them. But it was different now. He was a disciple of the Oracle Mountain. Regardless of whether it was for his own reputation or for the sake of protecting Oracle Mountain's reputation, he had to take action in reaction to this. Haha, this kid has some backbone. Senior brother Gong Sun, since it's like this, then allow me to experience this friend's ability. That silver-robed man wasn't able to restrain himself since a long time ago, so he immediately stepped forward, and his gaze was like a bolt of lightning as it swept over coldly and locked onto Chun Shi. Moreover, the corners of his mouth were covered in a cold and disdainful expression. When the others saw this, they immediately understood that the battle was like a nocked arrow, and it had to be shot. For a time, the gazes of everyone shot onto the silver-robed man and Chan Shi in unison, and the atmosphere was confrontational. The silver-robed man's name was Xianxia, and he was a justice enforcement disciple of the Divine Institute. His status was higher than a law-managing disciple's, yet lower than a power seal disciple. As the name implied, it meant to enforce justice on behalf of the heavens. As the elite force of the Divine Institute, all the justice enforcement disciples possessed extraordinary natural talent that far exceeded their peers. Since Xianxia was able to follow by Gong Sun Mu's side, his cultivation and combat strength was naturally extraordinary. At this moment, when they saw him take the initiative to challenge Chun Shi, all the others in the hall were slightly surprised, and they felt like it was an act of employing great talent for a trivial task. In other words, in their opinion, Chun Shi seemed to possess an ordinary appearance and natural endowment, yet seemed to not know his own limits, and such a person was unworthy of fighting a disciple of the Divine Institute. Never mind. There's no need to persuade them any longer. Allow the emissary of the Divine Institute to teach that arrogant and disrespectful fellow a good lesson, so as prevent him from acting haughtily and recklessly again. Shinta Mingda laughed coldly, while he instructed Shinta Xing to not interfere in this matter. That's exactly what I intend to do. Yenron's friend? It looks to me like this fellow thinks he has ingratiated himself to Yenran and had become conceited and puffed up with pride. Shinta Xing laughed coldly without end as well, and he seemed to intend to watch the show. There were many people that had the same thoughts as this pair of father and son. All of them felt that Chun Shi was too arrogant, didn't know his limits, and didn't know what was good for himself. For a time, all those great figures of the Shinta clan didn't interfere in this battle that was about to occur. As for the disciples of the Divine Institute, it was even more impossible for them to stop all of this. Earlier, Chun Shi had gone against them repeatedly, and this was simply like the greatest offense to their Divine Institute. They truly never imagined that an unknown fellow would actually dare to enter into confrontation with their Divine Institute. If this occurred in the outside world, they'd have probably attacked and killed this person. How could they have waited until now? Now, when Xianxia took the initiative to challenge Xianxia, it was exactly what they wished to see happen. All of them wished for nothing more than to see Xianxia crush this arrogant and ignorant fellow so as to allow them to vent their anger. Amongst the people present, only Yanran remained silent. If one looked carefully, it wasn't difficult to notice that her gaze towards she actually faintly carried a trace of gratitude, and this seemed to be slightly strange. As for Qingyuan, the patriarch of the Xintu clan, he was still revealing that indifferent expression that caused others to be unable to guess what he was thinking. Moreover, he'd remained silent from the beginning until the end. At this moment, the atmosphere grew even more deathly silent and confrontational, while the battle could erupt at any moment. The gazes of every descended onto Xianxia and Xianxia. "You!" Right amidst this deathly silence, Xianxia spoke. He merely glanced at Xianxia before he shook his head. "You're too weak. Let another person spar with me." His voice was flat and casual, and it didn't carry a ridiculing tone. However, when it entered into the ears of the others in the hall, it seemed to be extremely arrogant and haughty. Many people frowned. Could it be that this fellow really wants to die? Especially Xianxia. The corners of his lips couldn't help but twitch when he heard Xianxia. That damnable bastard! How arrogant! He started laughing from extreme rage, and he said in a ghastly tone, "Just because of these words of yours, this young master will absolutely not forgive you even if you kneel and beg for mercy." Bang! His voice hadn't finished resounding through the air when he'd stretched out his fair palm and formed a seal in midair. It was suffused with brilliant white light as it suddenly crushed down towards Xianxia, causing space to collapse while the divine tune of the Grand Tao resounded endlessly. At this instant, Xianxia was like a god that resided in the 9 heavens. He seemed dignified and stately, and he emanated a monstrous, imposing aura that felt invincible. The supreme inheritance of the Divine Institute, the seal of judgment. Someone exclaimed with shock as that person had immediately recognized this technique. This instantly caused a wave of shock to arise in the surroundings, and they sighed in their hearts. The disciples of the Divine Institute really are formidable. He already utilized a supreme technique with world-shocking offensive ability as soon as he attacked. However, this also allowed others to determine that Xianxia was truly infuriated at this moment, and he intended to crush Xianxia in one go so that he could vent the rage in his heart. "This technique isn't bad. No wonder you dared to act so arrogantly." Xianxia's eyes narrowed. Xianxia really did possess some ability, and merely this attack alone was indeed capable of suppressing most of his peers that were at the same realm of cultivation. However, Xianxia didn't mind it at all. He'd even killed an imperial monarch, so he would naturally not become fearful because of this. However, he admitted that if he didn't use a bit of his true ability, then he would definitely have to go to a lot of trouble to end this battle. After all, Xianxia was a disciple of the Divine Institute, and his combat strength was extraordinary. Bang! Suddenly, Xianxia's aura rose explosively. It was like a peerless, ferocious beast had awakened within him and emerged into the world. In an instant, his imposing aura changed abruptly. Divine radiance suffused his entire body and transformed into rays of light that coiled around him while his gaze was haughty and murderous. Moreover, his tall figure emanated a sharp glow that was fierce and oppressive. Clang! A flick of his fingers caused a wisp of a sword howl that sounded like a rock being split apart to resound, and then a wisp of sword chi shot out from the tip of his finger. This space in the boundless surroundings trembled, and the world was crushed into pieces, collapsed, and destroyed by this wisp of sword chi, causing a shocking scene of destruction to be revealed. At this moment, the ability Xianxia revealed was even sufficient to fight a life-and-death battle with exalts of the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm. Obviously, he intended to decide the outcome of the battle with this strike as well. Bang! A deafening explosion resounded and rumbled through the surroundings. Space exploded into powder while a rain of light descended. To the astonishment of everyone in the surroundings, the seal Xianxia condensed had suddenly shattered into pieces in the next moment, and his palm seemed to have been cut by a sharp blade. Blood sprayed from it while his bones had been broken, and his entire body was shaking violently while he let out shrill cries. Xianxia's figure flashed, and then he held the fellow up in his hand. After that, Xianxia left an afterimage behind as he swiftly returned to where he stood earlier. I told you that you were too weak, but you just had to try and flaunt your superiority. Moreover, you even said that you wouldn't forgive me even if I kneel and beg for mercy. So, you should kneel. Amidst his calm and indifferent voice, a bang resounded as Xianxia hurled Xianxia forcefully to the ground, causing Xianxia to kneel on the ground while his knees had even been blasted into pieces, and fresh blood flowed all over the ground. Everyone in the surroundings was astounded, and they almost didn't dare believe their own eyes. All of this had occurred too quickly, and it had ended in an instant. So, they weren't even able to recover from their shock before Xianxia had suffered miserable defeat and was kneeling on the ground. This was really too shocking. In their opinion, Xianxia was a disciple of the Divine Institute. So, even if he was inferior to Gongsun Mu, his combat strength was still stronger than most of his peers. On the other hand, no one knew where Xianxia had come from at all. Moreover, he had both an ordinary appearance and bearing, yet he spoke in such an extremely arrogant manner, causing them to feel that he was a crude fellow that didn't know his own limits. So, how could he possibly be a match for a genius like Xianxia? Yet now, Xianxia had been defeated by a single strike. Moreover, Xianxia had been forced to kneel on the ground and didn't even have room to struggle. Before all of this had occurred, who would have dared to believe that such an incident would occur? Not to mention the clansmen of the Xinta clan. Even those great figures at the imperial monarch realm had never expected that such a shocking turn of events would occur. It was even to the extent that the expressions of those disciples from the Divine Institute had frozen while their pupils constricted, and they were unable to believe their eyes. No! Xianxia couldn't restrain himself from howling any longer. He knelt on the ground with disheveled hair. His knees were shattered, the flesh and skin on his palm had been split apart, and his bones had been broken. This howl had completely jolted awake those disciples of the Divine Institute from their shock. You're courting death! A gold-robed woman let out a sharp cry as she suddenly charged out, and with a flick of her sleeve, a myriad of strands of golden light shot out and enveloped down towards Xianxia. You overestimate your ability. Xianxia glanced coldly at her, and then he raised his palm and slapped casually. Rumble! Divine radiance rumbled. The myriad of strands of golden light were like paper that were easily blasted apart by Xianxia's slap. Slap! An extremely clear and ringing sound of a slap resounded. The gold-robed woman didn't even have the time to dodge before half her delicate and pretty face had swelled up. Moreover, blood and teeth sprayed from her mouth while her entire body was blasted flying before crashing to the ground. She'd really arrived swiftly and left swiftly as well. She wasn't a match for a single blow from Xianxia, and she'd been smashed to the ground with a single slap. The surroundings fell perfectly silent. Those are disciples of the Divine Institute. How could they be so weak? Everyone was stunned. At this moment, Xianxia simply seemed like a completely different person in their eyes. He was filled with an aura of supremacy, and he was extremely terrifying. They finally realized that this friend of Yanran's was definitely no ordinary person, and he was a peerless figure in the universe's enlightened ancestral god realm. If it wasn't for that, how could he easily crush Xianxia to the point of kneeling on the ground and slapping that gold-robed woman flying with a single swing of his palm? How could this be possible? Shinta Xing cried out involuntarily with disbelief. Shinta Mingda opened his mouth yet was speechless because he was shocking by this scene that had occurred before his eyes. It wasn't just the two of them. All the great figures at the imperial monarch realm from the Shinta clan gasped without end as well. Could it be him? Shinta Bao had faintly guessed something yet didn't dare confirm it. On the other hand, a wisp of a strange expression flashed in the depths of Shinta Qingyuan's eyes. As for Shinta Yanran, she seemed to be very calm. She'd heard too much about Xianxia's deeds, so she wasn't really surprised that he was able to accomplish this, and she even felt that this was a matter of course. However, this was undoubtedly a heavy blow to the disciples of the Divine Institute, and it caused their expressions to change. "Bastard! You actually dared to humiliate me?" The gold-robed woman cried out in a sharp voice. That slap struck right on her face, and it burned and caused her to feel sharp pain. Moreover, her face had swelled up to an unsightly level, so she was furious to the limit. She strode forward while his icy-cold gaze had locked onto her, and he seemed to intend to launch another attack. "You! Who will kill him for me?" The gold-robed woman's body shivered as she was terrified by She's killing intent to the point that she was on the verge of losing her mind. As the descendant of a great figure in the Divine Institute, she'd never suffered such humiliation and suffering, so she was both furious and terrified at this moment. Bang! Space shook as if fiend gods were striking their drums, and it caused this expanse of space to shake and shatter into pieces. Moreover, it shook the people in the vicinity to the point that the vital blood of many roiled, and they felt extremely astounded by this. At this moment, another disciple of the Divine Institute had made a move. He held a golden violet-colored jade ornament that flowed with multicolored light, and it emanated a myriad of strands of auspicious radiance. Its might was unparalleled, and it directly collapsed the space before it as it smashed down towards Shi. Obviously, this golden violet-colored jade ornament was a natural spirit treasure capable of crushing fiend gods, and it was a great weapon of destruction that possessed world-shocking might. As soon as he attacked, a strand of terrifying ripples arose from the jade ornament, and it even caused the hall to tremble violently and seemed to be on the verge of collapse. This caused the great figures of the Xianxia clan to be alarmed. At this moment, Xianxia Qingyuan was unable to maintain his silence any longer, and he shouted loudly in a deep voice, "Activate the divine formation!" As soon as he finished speaking, the entire clan hall was suffused by a seemingly material layer of divine radiance. Mysterious talisman markings circulated within it, and it covered every inch of space here. The signs of collapse stopped at this moment, and the hall became extremely stable. This was an important place in the Xianxia clan, so it was naturally impossible for it to not be protected by restrictions. At this moment, because the attack from that disciple of the Divine Institute was shockingly destructive, Xianxia Qingyuan could only activate these divine restrictions in the end. Otherwise, if he allowed the battle to erupt just like that, then this clan hall that had stood towering for countless years would definitely be destroyed. Such a change in the surroundings hadn't affected the battle at all. The disciple of the Divine Institute that held the jade ornament surged with divine light as he tore through space, and boundlessly gorgeous ripples swept out from the jade ornament and smashed down fiercely at Xianxia. Compared to Xianxia and that woman in a golden robe, this disciple that attacked at this moment definitely possessed a strength that was much more formidable. However, Xianxia still remained calm, composed, and indifferent when facing this attack. "You overestimate your ability." Xianxia lightly spat out a few words, and it caused the hearts of everyone within the hall to constrict. Swoosh! In the next moment, under the astounded gazes of everyone present, Xianxia stomped Spare apart with a single step forward, and then he charged directly at that disciples from the Divine Institute. His entire body glowed. He was like a scorching sun in the sky, and he was extremely blazing. He was bathed in the glow of the Grand Tao, and it enveloped his entire body, causing the jade ornament that smashed down to actually be unable to harm him at all. Such a scene was like one where Xianxia was invulnerable to all techniques, and it caused everyone to be shocked and filled with disbelief. Bang! Before they could recover from their shock, Xianxia has already stretched out his hand and blasted the golden violet-colored jade ornament flying. After that, he flicked his sleeve, and merely this strike alone had forcefully crushed that disciple to the ground. Pooh! That disciple of the Divine Institute coughed up large mouthfuls of blood, and he seemed as if he'd been crushed by a divine mountain. He was powerless to struggle free, and the terrifying force from it simply caused him to be on the verge of suffocation. Crack! He felt the bones in his chest break. The boundless sharp pain from this caused his face to twist, and he couldn't restrain his shrill cries any longer. Everything had occurred in an instant, and it was swift to the point others were unable to react in time. No one was able to imagine that Xianxia's combat strength would actually be so terrifying, and his actions would be so overbearing and domineering. Since he defeated Xianxia and the golden-robed woman, and even this disciple that he'd crushed, all of them were crushed with a single strike. Such an all-powerful method of battle and supreme bearing of cutting through everything with ease caused him to seem as if he met no resistance. So, how could it be something that could be described with merely the words domineering and overbearing? Indeed, the strength Xianxia revealed now was too shocking indeed, and he seemed as if he was capable of sweeping away all obstacles. But one had to remember that his opponents were disciples of the Divine Institute. However, Xianxia was still able to defeat them so easily. So, exactly how terrifying was his combat strength? It was unimaginable. If it was said earlier that in the eyes of everyone, Xianxia was merely an ignorant young man that appeared out of nowhere, then at this moment, he was like a peerless overlord in the universe's enlightened ancestral god realm, and he possessed the might of a monarch that descended to the world and a majestic and powerful imposing aura. How could this kid be so formidable? How could? Xianxia muttered while seeming to have been driven to distraction. Earlier, he'd been constantly berating Xianxia, and he even intended to drive Xianxia out from the clan hall. But who would have imagined that this young man who he looked down upon would actually reveal such terrifying combat strength? So, how could he be able to accept this? We were mistaken. I never expected that kid would actually be so extraordinary. Xianxia Mingda's face was gloomy while his gaze flickered incessantly, and tempestuous waves were surging in his heart. Are you just going to watch as these fellows suffer? Xianxia glanced at Xianxia and the others who were letting out shrill cries while sitting on the ground, and then he swiftly turned around to look at Gong Sun Mu. Gong Sun Mu's face was emotionless and indifferent to the extreme. He'd witnessed all of this from the beginning until the end, and he'd experienced shock at the beginning before transitioning to his current indifference. He'd already determined that their opponent this time was extraordinary. It was even to the extent that he was sure Xianxia's combat strength was sufficient to be ranked in the top 100 of the Universe Enlightened chart, and it was even to the extent that Xianxia's ranking might be even higher. Besides causing Gong Sun Mu to be furious, he couldn't help but be surprised and bewildered as he was unable to figure out Xianxia's origins. A young man dared to enter into conflict with the Divine Institute, and he even revealed such formidable combat strength. This matter seemed to be slightly unusual. It was exactly because he was unable to figure out Xianxia's origins that he hadn't made a move until now. How audacious! You're too arrogant. Could it be that you think none of us can subdue you? All the disciples by Gong Sun Mu's side berated because they felt extremely furious from being provoked by Xianxia in this way. When had they who were disciples of the Divine Institute suffer such humiliation? Xianxia directly disregarded all of this. His gaze was constantly locked onto Gong Sun Mu. Since they'd already entered into battle, he didn't mind allowing it to continue so that he could destroy their arrogance so as to prevent them from being conceited in the future. At this moment, the gazes of everyone within the hall descended onto Gong Sun Mu, and they seemed to want to see how he would react. Xianxia, why don't you stop just like this? Xianxia Yanran was slightly worried when she witnessed this, and she sent a voice transmission to Xianxia. Even though she was clearly aware that Xianxia couldn't be compared to the past, but she was also aware that as the third Power Seal disciple of the Divine Institute, Gong Sun Mu's combat strength was terrifying. So, if Xianxia continued the battles and fought Gong Sun Mu, then the final victor would truly be difficult to determine. There's no need to worry. Xianxia sent a voice transmission, and he gestured at Xianxia Yanran to indicate that there was no need for her to say anything further and that he knew when to stop. Junior brother Taba. Suddenly, Gong Sun Mu, who'd remained silent until now, had spoken. Senior brother, said Taba Chuan from the side. Are you willing to fight for the Institute? Said Gong Sun Mu. Obviously, he thought highly of Taba Chuan, and he even asked about Taba Chuan's thoughts before deciding. The members of the Xianxia clan weren't very surprised when they saw this. Taba Chuan was an extraordinary genius indeed, and he was similarly a Power Seal disciple of the Divine Institute. Even though he was ranked lower than Gong Sun Mu, He wasn't interested in any other affairs of the world besides cultivation, and that was the reason why his ranking was so low. "All right," Taba Chuan nodded, and then he stood up. He wore linen clothes and had an ordinary appeared. However, he emanated a heavy and lofty aura that was terrifying, and he seemed like an immovable rock that resided at the precipice. However, at this moment, when he stood up, his imposing aura suddenly changed. His gaze was like a bolt of lightning while the energy of the divine Tao seethed around his body, and the extremely oppressive energy within it shot into the 9 heavens. The divine Tao was just like that. When it was restrained, one's heart would fuse with the grand Tao. It was flat and uninteresting, and it was like returning to the embrace of nature. However, once the divine Tao erupted, it would be like a divine sword that shot out from the 9th hell, and its edge would shock the heavens and the earth. "This is an expert." Chun Shi's eyes narrowed as he realized how terrifying Taba Chuan was. Taba Chuan had a simple outward appearance, but the divine energy within his body surged like a campfire and seethed like the ocean. It was like a true dragon was lying dormant within him, and he was definitely a peerless figure that couldn't be judged by outward appearance. "Senior Shintu, I heard your clan possesses a Devil War battlefield. I wonder if you can allow me to utilize it." Suddenly Gongsun Mu shot his gaze at Shintu Qingyuan and spoke flatly. "Of course." Shintu Qingyuan smiled before he flicked his sleeve, and then a strand of clear radiance swiftly tore through the sky and appeared at the center of the hall. After that, a wave of strange and obscure fluctuations arose from this strand of clear radiance. Suddenly, it emanated a myriad of strands of divine light that covered the heavens and the earth. Everyone felt the scene before their eyes flash, and then the scene had changed abruptly. They noticed that they'd actually arrived in a boundless expanse of the starry sky. This expanse of the starry sky had numerous stars floating in it, and they circled around to form a combat arena. It could be said to be boundlessly vast and extremely grand. Chun Shi raised his eyes to look over, and then he noticed that this combat arena was extremely miraculous. The grand scene it revealed carried a strand of a desolate and ancient aura. It was created from sterix and branded with numerous mysterious markings of the Tao, and it was suffused with an extremely surging and unyielding aura of slaughter. Obviously, one absolutely didn't have to worry about the combat arena being pierced through, nor did one have to worry about the battlefield being too narrow when fighting here, and one could go all out. This was the Devil War battlefield. It was refined by an ancestor of the Shinta clan, and it was specially refined to temper the ability of disciples in combat and slaughter. After all, once one attained the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm in one's cultivation, attacks were capable of easily causing the heavens and the earth to collapse and all things to be transformed into powder. No to mention a city, even a star, the sun, or the moon would be obliterated because the destructive force of universe-enlightened ancestral gods was too shocking. With the Devil War battlefield, the Shinto clan's disciples didn't have to worry about this. Obviously, Gongsun Mu only had a single objective behind his request to Shinto Qingyuan to activate this battlefield, and it was to allow Taba Chuan to completely reveal his combat strength and defeat Chun Shi in one go instead of being restrained by the location of the battle. Swoosh! Taba Chuan didn't speak a single word. His figure flashed before he arrived within the Devil War battlefield in the next moment. The battle intent within his body shot into the sky like rays of light, and it threw the heavens and the earth into disorder. Is this the imposing aura of a Power Seal disciple from the Divine Institute? The eyes of all the imperial monarchs from the Shinto clan focused while they immediately noticed how formidable Taba Chuan was. They reflected on it in their hearts and realized that even if it was when they were at the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm, they would definitely be unable to possess an imposing aura that was equivalent to Taba Chuan. Chun Shi didn't reveal any fear when facing this. He strode forward as if he was taking a stroll through his own backyard, and he arrived within the Devil War battlefield to stand in confrontation with Taba Chuan from afar. "Senior Brother Taba, please reveal the supreme might of your divine Tao and swiftly crush that fellow." Humph! With Senior Brother Taba confronting that fellow himself, that kid is bound to be defeated. Senior Brother Taba is a Power Seal disciple of our Divine Institute, and he's ranked at the 13th position. There are probably extremely few people in the entire ancient god domain that can compare to him. Exactly. Don't forget that senior brother Taba is an existence that's ranked at the 39th position on the Universe Enlightened chart. Those disciples of the Divine Institute were excited, and they were filled with strong confidence in Taba Chuan. In their opinions, no matter how arrogantly Chun Shi acted earlier, it was absolutely impossible for Chun Shi to be a match for Taba Chuan. It was even to the extent that many people started to deduce exactly how many moves Taba Chuan would need to crush Chun Shi. On the other hand, at this moment, a wisp of worry couldn't help but arise in the heart of Shinta Yenran that was originally filled with confidence in Chen Shi. Taba Chuan is a power seal disciple of the Divine Institute, and he possesses a cultivation at the peak of the universe enlightened ancestral god realm. Moreover, his combat strength is extremely terrifying as well. Will Chun Shi be all right when facing such an opponent? Witnessing the monstrous divine might Taba Chuan revealed caused all the disciples of the Divine Institute to feel excited. Even Gong Sun Mu couldn't help but nod to himself upon witnessing this. He felt that dispatching Taba Chuan was already sufficient to crush Chun Shi and turn around the disappointing situation from before. The reactions of the clansmen of the Shinto was extremely complicated at this moment. They were surprised by the terrifying combat strength that Chun Shi had revealed earlier, yet they were also very unwilling to watch him continue acting arrogantly. This sort of feelings very extremely conflicting, and they were difficult to describe clearly. Only Shinto Mingda and Shinto Xing were comparatively delighted. They wished for nothing more than to see Taba Chuan defeat Chun Shi and completely crush him. In this way, it would preserve the face of the Divine Institute's disciples while eliminating this barrier that was Chun Shi, allowing the collaboration between the Shinto clan and Divine Institute to be carried out smoothly. Bang! Suddenly, it was like a thunderclap had resounded in the Devil War battlefield, and it shook their ears to the point or droning, while completely suppressing the clamorous noise in the surroundings. Bright light shot out from the eyes of Taba Chuan, who had a simple appearance and was steady like a mountain, and then two rays of crimson light shot out explosively from his pupils. They formed into two bolts of lightning that carried a monstrous aura of slaughter as they smashed down towards Chen Shi. Everyone was extremely shocked, as they'd never expected that the two of them wouldn't speak a single word before the battle erupted. At this moment, Taba Chuan was like a god that controlled lightning. Terrifying phenomena were created merely by him opening his eyes, and the surging green thunderstorm within his eyes was truly shocking to the extreme. The supreme inheritance of the Divine Institute, nightmare lightning obliteration, someone exclaimed with surprise. The people in the surroundings instantly understood that Chun Shi had encountered an extremely terrifying figure because Taba Chuan had actually fused the might of a supreme technique of the Divine Institute into his eyes. And this wasn't something that an ordinary person could accomplish. Rumble. Space was torn apart while green bolts of lightning filled the might to obliterate the world, shot explosively through the heavens and the earth, and they were like shocking dragons that intended to throw Yin, Yang, and the world into disorder. Chun Shi pressed his fingers together and stabbed with them like they were the blade of a sword, and then two strands of extremely dazzling sword chi tore through space as they shot out. It was the dismemberment style of the profound heart sword technique. It was fierce, murderous, and flowed with strands of crystalline and translucent heart energy, causing it to seem mysterious and obscure as it slashed the boundless green bolts of lightning apart in one go. Moreover, the sword chi didn't lose momentum at all and shot towards Taba Chuan's eyes. Clang! Suddenly, a dense expanse of green lightning appeared like a waterfall before Taba Chuan, and they transformed into a lightning symbol that contained supreme lightning energy. With a flash of lightning, the two strands of sword chi were blocked, causing sparks to shoot into the surroundings. Senior brother Taba, kill him! Many disciples of the Divine Institute started shouting. Abyss of destruction. A rumbling bang resounded in the next moment. Taba Chuan circulated the nightmare lightning obliteration technique while spreading his arms, and he teleported through space while carrying dazzling lightning with him. Monstrous rumbling of thunder resounded as he dived down towards Chun Shi with peerless divine might. At this moment, time seemed to have stopped, and everyone held their breaths in concentration while all clamorous noise had stopped abruptly. Because the strike was too terrifying, and it shook the heavens and the earth. Even if it was those great figures at the imperial monarch realm, their hearts shook before this attack, and they watched the battlefield anxiously. Even they'd never imagined that Taba Chuan's combat style would actually be so ferocious, and as soon as he would attack swiftly and ferociously in an extremely dazzling manner. The nightmare lightning obliteration technique that was renowned in the Divine Institute revealed an imposing aura that was sufficient to shake the ages, and his full force strike shook the universe. On the other hand, Xianxia charged out as well. Divine energy surged throughout his body as he swiftly transformed into a rock that raged through the heavens and the earth while carrying powerful divine energy, and he simply seemed as if he was on the verge of blasting space into pieces. When looked at from afar, it was like watching a rock descend from the heavens and swim through the river of stars, and it possessed the might to whistle through the world and swallow the universe. The Rock Divine Technique. Is this kid a descendant of the Rock clan? Many people recognized this technique, and their pupils constricted while they felt slight disbelief. Rumble. Before they could recover from their shock, Xianxia and Taba Chuan collided. It was like a collision between the sun and moon or the eruption of a myriad of volcanoes. Collapsing divine energy filled the surroundings, and it rumbled as it swept off into the distance. Everyone felt a piercing pain in their eyes and were unable to open them, while the vital blood of some even started roiling. Their minds and hearts were impacted, and it caused their bodies to tremble. The collision this time was truly too intense. Green lightning surged and covered the heavens and the earth. A rock rose into the sky and fly amidst the grand Tao. The collision between Taba Chuan and Xianxia created all sorts of terrifying phenomena like fiend gods roaring furiously, the heaven Tao crying tears of blood, thunderstorms rising into the sky, all things collapsing. Such a terrifying scene made it seem like everyone had returned to the time when the chaos had just been split apart. At that time, the gods fought for supremacy while all sorts of primeval variant beasts roamed freely through the world. They launched expeditions throughout the world, tore the universe into pieces, and swept through expanse after expanse of the starry sky. Bang! An enormous bang resounded as a rain of light shot into the surroundings. The two figures split apart and each stood at a different side. They were actually equally matched, and both of them were unable to harm their opponent. How could this kid be so strong? Even Taba Chuan was unable to crush him in one go. The clansmen of the Xianxia clan were astounded, and they felt slight disbelief. They felt that Xianxia seemed even more unfathomable. Those disciples of the Divine Institute had shut their mouths as well, and they were surprised and bewildered, even if they were unwilling to admit it. But the facts of the scene before them proved that Xianxia actually possessed an ability that was sufficient to go against their senior brother Taba. Gong Sun Mu's eyes narrowed while his expression turned even more indifferent, and he merely said, "The battle has just begun. Continue watching." On the Devil War battlefield, Taba Chuan's expression turned slightly solemn, but his imposing aura blazed even stronger than before. Clang! 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 9 successive clangs that rumbled forcefully like the tune of the Grand Tao resounded, and then 9 lightning wheels appeared behind Taba Chuan. They were gorgeous, brilliant, and emanated a strange force. Every single lightning wheel contained terrifying lightning energy, and it was like a kingdom of lightning. When the 9 wheels were overlapped, it was like the formation of a universe of lightning, and it revealed boundless phenomena. This was the energy of creation that was contained within the nightmare lightning obliteration technique, and it possessed the supreme might to form a world and establish all things. But in merely an instant, the 9 wheels of lightning transformed from a gorgeous color into a gray and hazy color, and they emanated an extremely terrifying and oppressive aura of death and destruction. In the next instant, the 9 wheels of lightning soared into the sky like numerous black suns that lay across the sky, and they crushed space into pieces as they smashed down towards Xianxia. Swoosh! Xianxia stretched out his hand and grabbed. An ancient sword that was condensed from divine Tao laws appeared in space, and then Xianxia's figure flashed before he slashed it lightning through space. It was utterly otherworldly. It was filled with a simple and primitive aura like how the Tao was said to be natural. It gave others an extremely tranquil and carefree feeling, and it was like they were witnessing the divine traces of the Grand Tao. It caused them to be unable to help but become immersed in it. The greatest beauty in the world couldn't be described. Bang! The sword chi mirrored the sky while the wheel illuminated the 9 heavens. The two of them collided in an instant. It was like the chaos was being split apart for the first time. Chaotic chi erupted while various terrifying phenomena like the scenes of fiend gods howling and sages reading scriptures appeared, and these phenomena ceaselessly appeared and surged between them. Moreover, peerless energy of divine Tao order raged like a gale and ceaselessly rumbled and collided. One was bathed beneath lightning like a god that controlled the Tao of lightning, whereas the other had transformed into a rock that flew through the world and controlled a peerless Tao of the sword. They fought for supremacy on Devil War battlefield, and they fought to the point the sun, moon, and surroundings dimmed in comparison. Such a scene could simply be described as world-shocking and peerlessly rare, and it caused all the others outside the battlefield to be dazzled and practically forget to breathe. Both of them were at the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm, but their combat strengths had already attained a terrifying height in the universe-enlightened ancestral god realm, and they could be said to be peerless and unprecedented in their realm of cultivation. Yanran is that kid. Him. Outside the battlefield, Shinta Bao had suddenly arrived by Shinta Yanran's side, and he gazed at the latter while seeming to be lost in thought. Who? Shinta Yanran was clearly aware in her heart, yet she feigned ignorance when she spoke. You little girl. Could it be that you even intend to keep it from your third uncle? Quickly tell me. Is it that kid or not? Shinta Bao laughed bitterly. Shinta Yanran was just about to answer him when she suddenly noticed that it wasn't just Shinta Mingda who'd shot his gaze over. Even her father was looking over as well, so she instantly changed her answer and said, Ask him yourself later. Shinta Bao's face froze, and he shook his head helplessly in the end. However, in his heart, he'd roughly determined that the young man who was fighting Taba Chuan on the Devil War battlefield right now was probably that kid from the Oracle Mountain. There was only a single reason why he'd made such judgment. It was because that no matter if it was defeating Xiao Tianqi and the others, or fighting Taba Chuan now, very few people in the entire ancient god domain were able to accomplish this. Moreover, according to his knowledge, amongst the friends that Shinta Yanran had made, only that personal disciple from Oracle Mountain that he'd met at the shore of God Burial Ocean all those years ago possessed such a combat strength. When he thought up to here, Shinta Bao couldn't help but start quickly deducing in his heart. One if Oracle Mountain and the other is the Divine Institute. Perhaps this kid's appearance is a good development in the situation as well. I never expected that you would be an expert that kept a low profile. But if you merely possess such combat strength, then you'll definitely lose today. In Devil War battlefield, Taba Chuan, who was engaged in intense battle, spoke abruptly, and his heavy voice carried a wisp of haughtiness. This was the first time he'd spoken since the battle began. Yet his words weren't friendly, and they were filled with an oppressive tone. As he spoke, Taba Chuan's figure rumbled, while the color of the 9 wheels of lightning changed once more. They became pitch black like ink while numerous thick and large arcs of lightning flowed out like divine chains from within them. They seemed to intend to confine the world and crush everything within their confinement, and they were filled with an aura of destruction. Bang! The wheels hung high in the sky while divine chains of lightning struck out from them. The lightning shattered space into powder and rumbled through every inch of space, causing it to seem like a doomsday calamity was descending. Senior brother Taba, there's no need to show mercy to that bastard. Quickly end this battle. Right? Crush him. Let's see how he'll act arrogantly after that. When they witnessed this scene, all the disciples of the Divine Institute cried with excitement, and they cheered Taba Chuan on. I never expected that junior brother Taba's grasp of the nightmare lightning obliteration technique had actually attained such a state. Looks like he has been concealing a great deal of strength before me. A wisp of a bright light arose in Gong Sun Mu's eyes, and he seemed to be surprised by the might Taba Chuan possessed. I'll definitely lose? It's best not to speak too soon. Chun Shi spoke indifferently and casually. His tone wasn't aggressive and domineering at all, yet it could be considered as a reply to Taba Chuan's words. At this moment, Every single inch of his skin suddenly emanated extremely brilliant divine radiance. It was like he was bathed beneath the divine radiance of the Grand Tao as he collided endlessly with Taba Chuan. Yet he showed no signs of being unable to endure the battle or being suppressed. On the contrary, he seemed to be fighting Taba Chuan with ease. Chun Shi and Taba Chuan were fighting for supremacy. They fought from the sky to the ground, from the earth to the 9 heavens. They were entangled in battle, and divine radiance ceaselessly rumbled and swept out from their battle. Fortunately, the Devil War battlefield was extremely vast, and it was like a boundless starry sky. Moreover, the surroundings of the battlefield were branded with restrictions and mysterious markings that enveloped the entire battlefield, and it prevented the fluctuations of the battle was escaping the battlefield. Otherwise, if this battle erupted within the Shinto clan itself, then the destruction it created would truly be unimaginable. Bang! Taba Chuan cut a bolt and heroic figure as it attacked while carrying lightning around him, and he attacked ceaselessly with a ferocious, imposing aura. He was swift like lightning, and he was extremely dazzling. Needless to say, Taba Chuan's combat strength was extremely terrifying. Every single move he made possessed might capable of destroying the world, and he could absolutely be considered as the strongest opponent in the same cultivation realm that Chun Shi had encountered since advancing into the advanced stage of the universe enlightened ancestral god realm. Even Chun Shi had no choice but to admit that the nightmare lightning obliteration technique that Taba Chuan executed possessed inconceivable might. Every single attack of his was like a thunderstorm pouring down from the sky, and it shattered space into powder, crushed the elements, and was filled with seemingly material energy of death and destruction. How many people in the world could resist such world-shocking destructive might? If an ordinary universe-enlightened ancestral god were to participate in the battle, then that universe-enlightened ancestral god would be directly struck to death by the lightning, and even that person's soul would be obliterated. It was utterly impossible for an ordinary universe-enlightened ancestral god to have any ability to resist. However, in the opinion of everyone in the surroundings, it was Chun Shi's display that was the most shocking to them instead. They were clearly aware that as a power-sealed disciple of the Divine Institute, Taba Chuan's combat strength would naturally be formidable without any doubt. Moreover, he was even a formidable existence that was ranked at the 39th position of the Universe Enlightened chart. So, they weren't really surprised by the extraordinarily shocking ability that Taba Chuan revealed. However, Chun Shi was different. In their opinion, they were still unable to accept the scene where he defeated Xianxia and the others. Yet now, he was actually able to maintain an equally matched situation in the battle against Taba Chuan, and this simply caused them to almost not dare believe their eyes. Isn't this kid a little too formidable? Could it be that he's a peerless figure that has ascended the Universe Enlightened chart as well? The Rock Divine Technique and Cultivation in the Sword Tao at the Sword Emperor realm. In terms of cultivation, his cultivation at the advanced stage of the Universe Enlightened Ancestral God realm is inferior to Taba Chuan, yet he's able to accomplish this now. It's truly unbelievable. An imperial monarch of the Shinto clan spoke with a voice that carried a rare wisp of praise. Obviously, Chun Shi's display had imperceptibly affected the opinions of those imperial monarchs towards him. Actually, it wasn't just those imperial monarchs. Even the other clansmen of the Shinto clan had no choice but to admit that Chun Shi was extremely formidable and outstanding. Since he was able to fight for supremacy with a peerless genius like Taba Chuan, how could he possibly be an ordinary figure? Only Shinto Mingda and Shinto Xing's expressions were livid. Never had they imagined that even Taba Chuan would be unable to attain victory in the battle until now. Where exactly did this damnable bastard come from? Both father and son were anxious and filled with hatred. The only thing that allowed them to feel at ease was that the battle was still going on. Even though Taba Chuan hadn't attained victory, he hadn't been defeated as well. Presently, they could only hope that Taba Chuan would be able to turn the tide and win the battle. How could this be possible? How could this fellow be so strong? Could it be that senior brother Taba is holding back? That damnable bastard! Isn't he a bit too difficult to deal with? Those disciples of the Divine Institute frowned while they spoke with slight exasperation, and they weren't excited any longer. Indeed, their senior brother Taba still hadn't lost. However, when they saw Chun Shi was actually able to fight their senior brother Taba equally, they were slightly unable to accept it. He's just an arrogant fellow that came from nowhere, yet he's able to rival senior brother Taba in combat strength? Shut your mouths and continue watching. Gong Sun Mu puckered his thin and sharply curved lips before he spoke in a low voice. His expression was still indifferent as before, and only his eyes carried a wisp of gloominess that couldn't be eliminated. After a short moment, someone suddenly exclaimed with surprise, "There's something slightly wrong with the situation." As soon as these words were spoken, it bewildered most of the people in the surroundings as they were unable to discern what was wrong. Only a small portion of discerning and experienced figures had instantly came to an understanding, and they realized that something really was wrong with the situation. Since the battle had erupted until now, Taba Chuan's imposing aura had been rising ceaselessly while his combat strength was increasing incessantly. However, every single time he wanted to defeat Xianxia, his attacks would be dispersed without leaving a trace behind. This was a bit too shocking. Taba Chuan's combat strength was increasing incessantly, yet he was still unable to harm Xianxia at all. So, didn't that mean that Xianxia's combat strength was similarly being increased and regulated as the battle progressed? Moreover, didn't this mean that Xianxia hadn't exposed his true combat strength from the beginning until the end? And he'd only successively revealed the strength he'd held back when Taba Chuan ceaselessly increased his own strength? When they thought up to here, even those imperial monarchs were shocked in their hearts. Isn't this young man a little too unfathomable? Taba Chuan, who was in battle within the Devil War battlefield, had clearly realized this as well, and his simple and ordinary face had become solemn. At this instant, he'd taken Xianxia to be a formidable adversary, and he didn't dare underestimate or look down upon Xianxia at all. It was even to the extent that the strength Xianxia concealed caused Taba Chuan to be unable to determine exactly where Xianxia's limits lay. This caused a trace of palpitation to be unable to help but arise in Taba Chuan's heart. He was clearly aware that he wasn't dealing with an ordinary expert this time, and it was an extraordinarily terrifying opponent instead. Bang! Taba Chuan didn't dare hesitate to withdraw an ancient bronze furnace. Lightning seethed and blazed like lava within the furnace, and it was dazzling and resplendent. It illuminated the entire world, and it emanated an imposing aura that was brilliant and terrifying to the limit. The furnace of incessant fortune, a natural spirit treasure that possessed unfathomable might. It was passed down within the Divine Institute, and it contained a strand of natural lightning from within the chaos. Its destructive force to be shocking and even capable of rivaling the might of tribulation lightning from the heaven Tao. He actually forced junior brother Taba to utilize this treasure. Gong Sun Mu's eyes suddenly squinted while his expressions that had always been extremely indifferent since the beginning was unable to maintain its calm any longer, and he was extremely shocked. Bang! After he withdrew the furnace of incessant fortune, Taba Chuan's imposing aura suddenly improved once more, and he seemed like an emperor of lightning that was born from within the chaos while the energy of destruction covered the heavens and the earth. He controlled the bronze furnace and tore through the sky before smashing down towards Xianxia. Are they about to determine the victor? Everyone was shocked as they'd noticed Taba Chuan's imposing aura had already arrived at its limits, and he revealed a peerlessly mighty bearing. Shintu Yenran clenched her fists together silently. No matter how confident in Xianxia's combat strength she was, she couldn't help but feel a wisp of worry when she witnessed the terrifying divine might Taba Chuan revealed. At this moment, everyone in the surroundings held their breaths in concentration, and they practically forgot to breathe while their gazes stared fixedly and unblinkingly at the battlefield because they were deeply afraid of missing the slightest detail. At the same time, a strand of piercingly cold and terrifying light erupted from Xianxia's eyes, and then a wisp of a teasing arc silently appeared on the corners of his mouth. This is probably that fellow's limit. In the next instant, Xianxia actually didn't retreat but advanced instead. He flashed over to greet Taba Chuan's attack while an expanse of sword light silently floated up into appearance within his palm. It was like he held a kingdom of the sword within his palm, and he slapped it forcefully at the bronze furnace. Bang! A deafening sound of collision resounded. Everyone was astounded, They'd utterly never imagined that she would actually dare to go head-on against the furnace of incessant fortune with his bare hands. Moreover, to their astonishment, she actually didn't fall into a disadvantaged position when facing this full-force strike of Xian's. How could this be possible? The hearts of everyone shook, and their scalps went numb. He was able to use his bare hands to go against Chuan, who'd utilized the furnace of incessant furnace? Doesn't that mean that his combat strength far surpasses Chuan? Bang! 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 At this moment, she seemed to be domineering and overbearing to the extreme. He flashed through the sky while every single slap he swung was more ferocious and overbearing than the last. He fought the furnace of incessant fortune head-on, and his bearing of supremacy caused many people in the surroundings to feel awe in their hearts. Pooh! In the end, Chuan's figure suddenly stiffened, and a mouthful of blood couldn't help but spray from his mouth because of the impact of Xi's attack, causing his face to turn pale. Is that all you've got? She spoke lightly, yet his voice rumbled like the tune of the Tao and blasted space into pieces. His palms grew even more dazzling, and it was like he was controlling two kingdoms of the sword to attack and intended to obliterate the world. Shit! Gong Sun Mu suddenly stood up while his pupils dilated and flowed with an extremely shocking and cold glow. At this instant, it wasn't just Gong Sun Mu who couldn't remain seated. Even those imperial monarchs of the Xianxia clan were the same, and their expressions changed. As for the others, they'd been shocked by this battle since a long time ago, and they'd been shocked to the point of being unable to recover from their shock and were stunned on the spot. Pooh! Chuan couldn't restrain it any longer, and he successively coughed up another few mouthfuls of blood. It was an extremely miserable yet beautiful sight as his blood dyed the sky red, and his body swayed and was on the verge of collapse. My God! How could this be possible? Isn't he a bit too formidable? An uproar erupted in the surroundings. The mouths of everyone had opened wide while they were filled with disbelief. A Power Seal disciple and one that was ranked at the 39th position on the Universe Enlightened chart, Chuan, had actually been suppressed to the point of showing signs of defeat now. This had exceeded their expectations, and it caused them to find it difficult to believe. This kid is extraordinary. Many imperial monarchs of the Xianxia clan sighed with emotion, and they were still extremely shocked in their hearts. They'd utterly never imagined that this unprecedented battle would actually end in Chuan's defeat. On the other hand, the heaven-defying combat strength she revealed was truly too breathtaking, and it shocked them to the point of speechlessness. This fellow is definitely not a nobody. Gong Sun Mu's expression was gloomy, and he was unable to maintain his composure any longer. As for the disciples of the Divine Institute by Gong Sun Mu's side, all of their expressions were changing indeterminately. Luckily, Xinta Yanren heaved a long sigh of relief in her heart while a wisp of extraordinary splendor rippled silently within her clear eyes. However, right when everyone thought that Chuan had been defeated, suddenly, Chuan's eyes became bloodshot, and then they became extremely red. After that, he howled towards the sky while his hair stood on end, and then a circle of light flowed out from his body. He'd suddenly transformed into a ferocious beast. His appearance had changed completely, and it caused others to shudder with fear. His entire body was densely covered in green fur and skin, and he was shaped like a tiger yet large like a mountain. Moreover, his pupils were like two blood-red full moons while an enormous horn had grown from the top of his head, and he revealed monstrous ferocious might. Green Roar Dragon, someone cried out involuntarily. He actually utilized the origin energy within his bloodline. The crowd erupted into an uproar, and all of them were shocked in their hearts. The Green Roar Dragon. It was a variant beast that was said to be one of the great terrors of the primeval times. Its ancestor was born from within the chaos, and it was a true pure-blooded innate fiend god. This beast was shaped like a tiger, large like a mountain, and completely covered by green-colored fur and skin. Moreover, it had a gray-colored horn that contained the quintessence energy of the Tao of Lightning. On the other hand, Taba Chuan was a descendant of the Green Roar Dragon clan. Roar! After he transformed into his true form, which was a Green Roar Dragon, Taba Chuan roared towards the sky, and peerlessly ferocious might swept out from it while it simply seemed like he wanted to shatter the sun and moon with his roar. Suddenly, he pounced towards Xianxia, and his speed was so swift that it even forcefully tore open a completely straight rift in space. Xianxia's eyes narrowed as he exerted strength at his fingers, and he condensed peerlessly dazzling sword insight before slashing it down towards that descendant of a primeval variant beast that possessed monstrous ferocious might. Bang! The fur and skin that covered the entire terrifying Green Roar Dragon flowed with arcs of lightning, and he actually blasted Xianxia's attack apart. This was extremely shocking because he was being suppressed by Xianxia just moments ago, yet now he'd actually faintly possessed the might to turn the situation around. Roar! The Green Roar Dragon let out a long roar that shook the starry sky, and even the entire Devil War battlefield trembled. He seemed to have gone berserk, and the quintessence energy within his bloodline had been completely activated, allowing him to possess ferocious might capable of obliterating the heavens and the earth. The terrifying roar actually caused the eardrums of many experts outside the battlefield to split apart, and they almost fell unconscious. Fortunately, the battlefield was covered by defensive restrictions, otherwise the consequences would be even more severe. At this point in the situation, many people were shocked as they'd never expected that Taba Chuan would actually possess such a trump card. Humph! Xianxia's eyes turned cold abruptly, and he intended to utilize the Banisher and end the battle in one go, so as to avoid being further entangled in battle with Taba Chuan. However, before Xianxia could make a move, a voice suddenly resounded in the Devil War battlefield. "Junior brother Taba, come back." This voice was low and indifferent, and it was actually Gong Sun Mu's voice. At this moment, his face was expressionless while a cold glow flowed in his eyes. Even though he stood there silently, he emanated an indescribable imposing aura. This caused everyone in the surroundings to be stunned. Under such circumstances, why would Gong Sun Mu stop the battle? Could it be that he doesn't look favorably upon Taba Chuan's chances? This was too surprising to them. Taba Chuan, who'd transformed into a Green Roar Dragon, had stopped as well at this moment, and then he turned around while his blood-red eyes shot towards Gong Sun Mu. Gong Sun Mu didn't say another word, and he just gazed silently at Taba Chuan. "All right, OM." Taba Chuan's figure recovered to its human form, and then he didn't even spare a glance at Xianxia before he turned around and left the Devil War battlefield. The imposing aura around his body had been restrained, and he'd recovered his ordinary and simple appearance from before. There wasn't even a trace of ferocious might and killing intent in his entire body. If his countenance wasn't pale, then one might even wonder if he really was that peerlessly ferocious Green Roar Dragon that appeared earlier. As they watched Taba Chuan walk step by step away from the Devil War battlefield, no matter if it was the clansmen of the Xianxia clan or the disciples of the Divine Institute, all of them had slightly complicated expressions. They were clearly aware that even though Taba Chuan hadn't lost completely, leaving the battlefield at this moment was no different than announcing his inferiority to Xianxia. However, no matter how they racked their brains, they were unable to figure out why Taba Chuan, who was a disciple of the Divine Institute, would be willing to admit defeat just like that. Because this matter was related to his dignity. It wasn't just them. Even the disciples of the Divine Institute were unable to wrap their heads around why Gong Sun Mu had made such a decision at this moment. Unfortunately, Gong Sun Mu didn't provide any explanation. He seemed to heave a sigh of relief when he saw Taba Chuan listen to his order and retreat from the battlefield. After that, he looked from afar at Xianxia, who stood in the battlefield. "I have to admit that the combat strength you revealed today exceeded my expectations. But this isn't the end of all of this." Gong Sun Mu remained silent for a short moment before he spoke slowly. As soon as he finished speaking, turned around and left. "Let's go." He actually left without even looking back. When those disciples of the Divine Institute saw this, and of them were slightly stunned before they hurriedly followed him. "What? You're not coming here to spar with me?" Unexpectedly, Xianxia spoke indifferently and challenged Gong Sun Mu, and he actually didn't intend to stop just like that. "There's no need to be impatient. There'll naturally be an opportunity for us to spar after the Tao discussion held by the 5 extremes of the Imperial region begins. At that time, I'll give you a satisfying answer. Gong Sun Mu stopped for a moment and spoke indifferently, and he hadn't turned around from the beginning until the end. Swoosh! His voice hadn't finished resounding through the air when he'd already led the group of disciples from the Divine Institute to tear through the sky and leave. Xianxia's eyes couldn't help but narrow when he saw this, and then he pondered deeply in silence. When the members of the Xianxia clan witnessed this scene, they still felt slight disbelief. Gong Sun Mu and the others actually left just like that. On the other hand, Xianxia Mingda and Xianxia Xing's expressions immediately turned gloomy and unsightly to the extreme when they witnessed this, and they were furious to the point their chests rose and fell rapidly. Gong Sun Mu was the emissary of the Divine Institute this time. He was going to form a collaboration with the Xianxia clan. Yet now all of this had actually been spoiled. How could they accept this? Senior brother Gong Sun, we're leaving, just like that. After they left the Xianxia clan, Xiao Tianqi couldn't help but speak with a voice that carried extreme unwillingness. He'd been crushed by Chen Shi to the point of kneeling on the ground just now, and he'd been completely humiliated in public. So he was naturally unwilling to leave just like this. Gong Sun Mu remained silent and seemed to be in deep thought about something. Senior brother Gong Sun? Or perhaps it's because you think that senior brother Taba isn't a match for that fellow? Xiao Tianqi couldn't help but pursue an answer when he saw this. As soon as these words were spoken, it instantly drew the gazes of the other disciples because they were still puzzled in their hearts as well. Leaving in such a hurry seemed quite embarrassing, and if news of this were to spread, then it wouldn't just harm Taba Chuan's reputation. Even all of their reputations and even the reputation of the entire Divine Institute would suffer quite a blow. This was something they were unable to tolerate. It would be meaningless to continue the battle. Gong Sun Mu frowned, yet he sighed in the end and said, "Don't forget that fellow hadn't utilized any treasures from the beginning until the end." Their hearts shook as they instantly came to a faint understanding. They felt that the combat strength Taba Chuan possessed upon transforming into a green roar dragon would be sufficient to turn the situation around. Yet they'd overlooked the fact that if Chen Shi fully demonstrated his might and utilized some sort of treasure, then it would similarly cause his combat strength to become even more formidable. From the beginning until the end, Taba Chuan constantly remained silent and didn't refute Gong Sun Mu. Obviously, he admitted this as well. But such an outcome was something that those other disciples of the Divine Institute were still unable to accept. Then what if senior brother Gong Sun fought him? Asked one of the disciples. It's very hard to say. Gong Sun Mu pondered deeply for a long time before he spoke in an indifferent tone. If I fight with all my strength, then perhaps I would have the confidence to defeat him. However, I was never able to confirm exactly how much strength he'd held back. Under such circumstances, it was best to not fight him. The other disciples were utterly speechless when even Gong Sun Mu spoke in this way, and all of them went silent like cicadas in the winter. Even Gong Sun Mu was unable to confirm the ability of a fellow that came out of nowhere, and they felt that this was extremely depressing. They were disciples of the Divine Institute. When had they suffered such a blow? The fact that caused them to feel especially bitter in their hearts was that they actually didn't even know who Chen Shi was until now. He's probably Oracle Mountain's Chen Shi. Suddenly, Taba Chuan, who'd remained silent until now, spoke abruptly. Just these few words caused all those disciples of the Divine Institute to be shocked. Chen Shi, it was actually that fellow? I think that way too. Gong Sun Mu seemed to be very calm, and he'd clearly deduced this a long time ago. However, regardless of whether that fellow is Chen Shi or not, a figure like him would definitely participate in the Tao discussion held by the 5 extremes of Tihe Imperial region. At that time, I'll naturally fight him myself. All the others were shocked while waves rose and fell in their hearts. They'd naturally heard of Chen Shi's name as well, because he was a personal disciple of Oracle Mountain. And he was the little junior brother of the Grand Lord, Wuxia. As soon as he made an appearance a few years ago, he'd drawn the attention of all the various powers. As disciples of the Divine Institute that was similarly ranked amongst the 5 extremes of the Imperial region, they'd naturally heard of him a long time ago. However, None of them had expected that this Xianxia would actually be even more formidable than the rumors said. Then what about the collaboration with the Shinto clan? Taba Chuan frowned as he spoke. We'll drop it here and now. All of you have probably clearly noticed that old geezer, Shinto Qingyuan, was delaying and was unwilling to make his position clear. This is unusual. Now, a fellow that is extremely likely to be Xianxia made an appearance, so even if we head over and insist now, it would be in vain. When he spoke up to hear, a wisp of a ghastly expression suffused the space between Gong Sun Mu's brows. However, I hope the Shinto clan won't regret their decision in the future. His voice couldn't help but carry a wisp of viciousness. Bastard! Not long after Gong Sun Mu and the others left, Shinto Xing was unable to restrain the rage in his heart any longer, and he cried out loudly. Such a good collaboration was spoiled by an outsider now. He simply doesn't take our Shinto clan seriously. He instantly targeted Xianxia. The matter has already occurred. It's pointless to get angry about it now. Shinto Bao frowned as he spoke. The matter really is irredeemable. However, even if we have no chance of collaborating with the Divine Institute this time, we must make the person that spoiled it pay the price so as to make an example out of him. Otherwise, if the Divine Institute intends to place blame on our clan in the future, would anyone be able to endure the consequences? Shinto Mingda had a belly full of rage, and he couldn't help but shout loudly in a grim voice. He gazed at Xianxia with an icy cold gaze, and he truly wished her for nothing more than to cut Xianxia up into pieces. As soon as these words were spoken, it obtained the approval of many clansmen of the Shinto clan. Indeed, Xianxia had stood up for Shinto Yenran earlier, and his extremely shocking combat strength had proved how extraordinary he was. However, it was precisely because of him that the emissary of the Divine Institute had left in rage, and it had completely spoiled the collaboration between their Shinto clan and the Divine Institute. This caused them to be rather displeased. Xianxia had never expected this pair of father and son, Shinto Mingda and Shinto Xing, would actually seize this opportunity to flare up and target him at a moment like this. This caused him to be speechless while a trace of detest couldn't help but arise in his heart. Big brother, what do you intend to do? Shinto Bao's brows knit together even more tightly. Capture him and hand him over to the Divine Institute to be dealt with by them. It would be best if we're able to obtain the Divine Institute's forgiveness. Shinto Mingda seemed to have been waiting for this question for a long time, and he spoke without the slightest hesitation. Exactly. That must be done. Shinto Xing helped his father and chimed in from the side. Even at this moment, this pair of father and son were actually still thinking about the collaboration with the Divine Institute, and it truly caused Xianxia to feel that it was absurd and laughable. Since Shinto Mingda and Shinto Xing set their sights on Xianxia until they threatened to capture Xianxia and hand him over to the Divine Institute in order to redeem the collaboration with the Divine Institute, most of the clansmen of the Shinto clan remained silent during this entire process. Obviously, they were hesitating, and they were unable to decide. Only Shinto Bao's attitude was clear, and he strongly objected to it. But he seemed to have not obtained much support. When she saw this, Shinto Yenran frowned as well, and she was furious in her heart. She was unable to continue watching, and she said coldly, "Let me see who dares to do that." As soon as these words were spoken, it caused Shinto Mingda's face to sink. "Yenran, because you were running wild just now, the Divine Institute's emissary has been utterly offended. Could it be that you intend to continue running wild now? Yenran, there's nothing wrong with cherishing your friendship, but if you still refuse to keep your distance from this friend of yours, then it wouldn't just be you who suffers disaster in the end. It would be our entire Shinto clan. Can you bear responsibility for such a crime?" Shinto Xing berated in a displeased voice, and he wanted Shinto Yenran to keep her distance from Xianxia. "All I know is that if it wasn't for Xianxia, then I would have probably been forced by all of you to join the Divine Institute." Shinto Yenran's face was cold as ice, and she didn't shrink back at all as she did her best to fight for her point of view. Moreover, her voice was filled with extreme rage as well. Her peerlessly beautiful face had flushed red while her almond eyes were opened wide. She was exasperated indeed, as she'd never expected that Shinto Mingda and Shinto Xing would actually act so shamelessly at a time like this. and they actually intended to capture Xianxia in order to obtain the Divine Institute's forgiveness. She felt that they were simply going too far. Xianxia. Shintu Bao instantly revealed an expression of understanding. Xianxia. At this moment, the patriarch of the Shinta clan, Shinta Qingyuan, who'd constantly remained silent until now, had a wisp of a complicated expression on the corners of his mouth, and he seemed as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Xianxia. The expressions of many clansmen of the Shinta clan couldn't help but stiffen when they heard Shinta Yenran say the words Xianxia, and they seemed to be filled with disbelief. On the other hand, when he saw Shinta Yenran was actually being so impenetrable and thick-headed, Shinta Mingda couldn't help but shout loudly, "Who cares who he is? We must make him." When he spoke up to hear, he suddenly realized something, and his entire body stiffened while he cried out involuntarily with shock. Xianxia? Which Xianxia? Xianxia? Could it be that personal disciple of Oracle Mountain? Xianxia. Shinta Xing's entire body shook while he spoke with disbelief. For a time, the surroundings were deathly silent, and only the voices of this pair of father and son, that were filled with surprise and bewilderment, reverberated through the hall. At the same time, the gazes of practically everyone looked towards Xianxia, who was still standing in the Devil War battlefield. They revealed all kinds of expressions like surprise, shock, understanding, doubt, and so on and so forth. Besides him, would anyone dare to confront the Divine Institute in that way? When she saw this, Shinta Yenran instantly understood there was no need to continue concealing it, and she gazed at Shinta Mingda and Shinta Xing with a slightly ridiculing expression. She said, "Even Gong Sun Mu felt that Taba Chuan wasn't a match for Xianxia, and he admitted defeat and left. Yet someone just happens to be unwilling to accept the outcome. How truly laughable." Just this short sentence had confirmed Xianxia's identity and mocked Shinta Mingda and Shinta Xing in one go. It caused the expressions of all the clansmen of the Shinta clan to become complicated and change indeterminately. Who would have imagined that this fellow would actually be a personal disciple of Oracle Mountain? Especially Shinta Mingda and Shinta Xing. Their faces were both livid and ashen. They seemed as if they'd been struck by lightning, and they were stunned on the spot. Earlier, when the emissary of the Divine Institute, Gong Sun Mu, and the others hadn't arrived at the clan hall, Shinta Qingyuan had announced a string of world-shocking news, and all of them were related to Xianxia. For example, annihilating the descendant of the eternal Yi clan, Yi Feng, slaughtering Imperial Monarch Nandu's group. Even a great figure that possessed boundless divine might like Imperial Monarch Ziwei hadn't hesitated to attack boldly in order to repay the debt of gratitude he owed, and he'd annihilated Imperial Monarch Taijing's group and the 5 divine spirit generals of the sovereign sect. All of this was done for none other than to maintain Xianxia's safety. In the end, they'd even heard that the Grand Lord of Oracle Mountain, Wuxia, had annihilated Divine Sovereign Priest Mo Lin of the sovereign sect. At that time, when they heard this string of news, both Shinta Mingda and Shinta Xing were shocked in their hearts and felt extremely astounded. But who would have imagined that the young man they felt extreme hatred towards and intended to capture would actually be Xianxia? For a time, this pair of father and son felt like someone had struck them from the back, and their minds were slightly muddled while they felt utterly terrible. The personal disciple of Oracle Mountain, Xianxia, the junior brother of the Grand Lord, Wuxia. How could they dare to offend such a figure? At this moment, not to mention capturing Xianxia, Shinta Mingda and Shinta Xing simply wished for nothing more than to find a hole to hide in. It couldn't be helped. The current situation was truly too embarrassing. Besides causing them to be rendered speechless, a wisp of terror couldn't help but arise in their hearts. When they thought about how they'd offended a personal disciple of Oracle Mountain in order to curry favor with disciples of the Divine Institute, this pair of father and son simply felt like crying and were utterly dejected. Alas, Big Brother, oh, Big Brother, both of you simply lifted rocks to stone others yet dropped them on your own feet instead. Shinta Bao sighed in a slightly sarcastic tone. Shinta Mingda's expression was unsightly, yet he was utterly unable to retort. Big Brother, both of you should leave first. In the end, it was Shinta Qingyuan that spoke. He was slightly unable to bear the sight of Shinta Mingda and Shinta Xing feeling embarrassed. I. Shinta Mingda spoke in a hoarse voice, yet he hesitated to speak. In the end, he sighed, and then he turned around and led Shinta Xing away. In the eyes of everyone, his figure seemed slightly bleak at this moment, and it caused others to be unable to help but feel pity for them. She didn't pursue the matter, and he was unable to pursue the matter as well. In the end, Shinta Mingda was a clansman of the Shinta clan, and he was even Shinta Yenran's uncle, so it wasn't advisable for him to make too much of a fuss about it. Moreover, being able to watch this pair of father and son leave in such a sorry state now was already equivalent to them tacitly admitting their mistakes, and this was quite rare and commendable. After that, Shinta Qingyuan put away the Devil War battlefield and asked all the other clansmen to leave while only Chun Shi, Shinta Yenran, Shinta Bao, and a few others remained. Haha! Extraordinary! As expected of a personal disciple from Oracle Mountain. Shinta Qingyuan wasn't silent and reticent any longer. As he gazed at Chun Shi who sat by his daughter's side in the hall, he didn't conceal his praise at all. Senior is too kind. Chun Shi smiled. To tell you the truth, I'd faintly guessed your identity earlier, but I didn't dare say for sure, so I was a slightly poor host. I hope you can forgive me. At this moment, Shinta Qingyuan seemed to be very frank, and he took the initiative to admit that the reason he'd watched indifferently earlier was because he was unable to confirm Chun Shi's identity. It's understandable. Chun Shi was very clearly aware that such a change in Shinta Qingyuan's attitude had occurred firstly because he had a good relationship with Shinta Yenran, but most importantly, it was because of his identity as a personal disciple of Oracle Mountain. Alas, I feel slightly guilty. The incident that occurred today was absolutely not something I wished to see happen. Fortunately, you were here to help my Shinta clan deal with this danger it faced. Otherwise, I would really not know how I would refuse the Divine Institute's request. Shinta Qingyuan sighed with emotion. Chun Shi was stunned. He immediately understood that Shinta Qingyuan had already decided a long time ago, and he didn't have any intention to collaborate with the Divine Institute. Since it was able to put this patriarch of the Shinta clan in such a difficult position, this clearly showed how much pressure the Divine Institute had put on him. Father, the matter is already resolved now, so you don't have to be troubled by it. When she heard Shinta Qingyuan sigh incessantly, Shinta Yenran, his daughter, couldn't help but be slightly unable to bear the sight of this. The matter has been resolved, but it has caused Chun Shi to be like a shield for our Shinta clan, and he defended those disciples of the Divine Institute because of this. I feel regretful for this. Shinta Qingyuan frowned as he spoke. Chun Shi said in his heart, at least this Shinta Qingyuan is able to clearly distinguish between right and wrong. I didn't help him deal with those disciples of the Divine Institute in vain. Of course, the reason he'd acted in that way earlier was entirely for the sake of standing up for Shinta Yenran, and he didn't care at all about whether he offended Gongsun Mu's group. Since it's like that, then promise Chun Shi something and take it as a way to make up for the guilt you feel. Shinta Yenran puckered her lips and smiled. Oh? What is it? Quickly tell it to me. So long as I'm able to accomplish it, then I'll absolutely not refuse. Shinta Qingyuan's eyes lit up, and he agreed willingly. Shinta Yenran immediately told him about the reason Chun Shi had come to the Shinta clan. He wants to borrow the teleportation formation to head to the infinite universe? That's simple. After he heard everything, Shinta Qingyuan couldn't help but glance at Shinta Yenran with a strange gaze, and then he agreed without the slightest hesitation. Shinta Yenran's heart shuddered incomprehensibly from her father's strange gaze. Yet she didn't understand what it meant and couldn't help but feel a wave of bewilderment. Thank you, Senior. Chun Shi heaved a sigh of relief when he heard that this matter was resolved, and he smiled as he cupped his hands and thanked Shinta Qingyuan. There's no need for that. Since you're Yenran's friend, then you're not an outsider. Call me uncle in the future. Haha. Shinta Qingyuan laughed loudly. If you insist. Chun Shi smiled as well. Shinta Yenran couldn't help but be happy in her heart when she saw this, and she was naturally rather delighted when she saw that Chun Shi was able to obtain her father's acknowledgement. Shinta Bao asked from the side. Right. Chun Shi, when do you intend to depart? If it's possible, then I want to leave right now, said Xianxia after pondering deeply. Why are you in such a rush? Shintu Yenran's heart jerked. I offended a large amount of people all along the way here, and they're probably pursuing me throughout the world now. It's truly inadvisable for me to stay here for too long. She didn't conceal anything and answered truthfully. Only by returning to the sect might all of this be resolved. When they heard this, regardless of whether it was Shintu Yenran, Shintu Qingyuan, or Shintu Bao, all of them stopped persuading him. Because they were clearly aware that when compared to those enemies of Xianxi's, the forces of their Shintu clan were really unable to protect Xianxi. Since it's like that, then I won't ask you to stay. Please come with me. Shintu Qingyuan immediately stood up, and he led Xianxi out of the clan hall. He intended to personally activate the teleportation formation and send Xianxi off. Shintu Yenran bit her cherry lips, and then she went after them as well.